Chapter 248. Jin had just landed on the ground when a rustling sound came from the forest behind him. About 7 or 8 people came out one after another. The leader was a woman in her 20s. She looked very charming, with a pair of big eyes and a straight nose. The tip of her nose was slightly upturned, giving people a sense of playfulness. Her mouth was small and had a smile, revealing 2 rows of neat and white teeth. Under her knee-length skirt, she didn't wear any armor, revealing a pair of snow-white calves. Although the weather in the southwest region of the continent was very warm, it was still a bit too much. After all, it was still early spring. The most eye-catching thing was her hair. In this world, there were many intelligent races. Jin had seen all kinds of hair, but he had never seen colored hair. Under the sunlight, it emitted a rainbow-like luster. Jin couldn't go over and touch it, so he couldn't tell if it was natural or the result of dyeing it. The armor that the woman wore was not ordinary. There were many exquisite runes engraved on it, and she even wore a lot of gorgeous jewelry. From her appearance, this woman should be their leader. Moreover, everyone was surrounding her like a moon surrounded by stars. However, Jin had a strange feeling that no one here took the woman seriously. What was even stranger was that this woman was carrying a huge longbow that was almost as tall as a person on her back. This caused her to stumble as she walked. Such a huge longbow on a woman's back looked very awkward. Then, more than 10 tall and handsome horses stepped into Jin's field of vision. There was nothing to see, but when Jin's eyes swept over the horses, he suddenly turned back. Those were definitely not war horses. Their bodies were too tall, at least a head taller than ordinary war horses. Moreover, they were all silver-white in color. There was not a single strand of hair on their bodies. Their backs, abdomens, and 4 pairs of slender and strong legs were extremely streamlined. There was also a sharp horn that was more than a foot long on their foreheads. Every time they took a step, there would be a faint arc of electricity flashing at the tip of the horn. There is only one word that could describe these war horses: handsome. Seeing Jin's attention fall on the war horses, the girl smiled and said, "This is a unicorn. You haven't seen it before, right?" "This is a unicorn?" "Yes. It took us more than 3 months to catch and tame them." The girl said proudly, "The most annoying thing is that there are actually a few druids who have been opposing us. Otherwise, we would have succeeded long ago." Cough. The old man suddenly coughed. The young girl also realized that she had misspoken and stuck out her tongue. "Esteemed guest, this is Miss Louise." The old man introduced himself. "My name is Panvin, magician." My name is Raphael," Jin said calmly. Magician. But that old man was stunned. Clearly, he was just like Jin's friends, unable to sense Jin's mana fluctuations. "All right, we can continue on our way." The girl called Louise walked over and took the woman's arm. Jin's gaze fell on the woman again. Reality proved his judgment. Such a beautiful and well-dressed woman was no different from a cat or a dog. No one even bothered to introduce her. Although they seemed to be very close, the girl called Louise was not good at acting. It was all an act. However, Jin did not want to be nosy, nor did he want to explore the mystery. He just walked quietly in the middle of the group. Panvin was very interested in Jin's background and tried to find a topic to talk about. Louise was the same, interjecting a few words from time to time. Jin also wanted to know more about the southwest region. Both sides had questions and answers, and the atmosphere was very harmonious. Just like how Jin knew nothing about this place, Panvin's knowledge was also very limited. Jin mentioned the names of a few lords in the northeast region, but Panvin had never heard of any of them. He only knew of Duke Solomon of the City of Elements. It was clear to see how uninformed this place was. Of course, this had nothing to do with Panvin. The continent was constantly at war, and no wanderer or caravan could reach the other side of the continent. Knowing what happened within 1,000 miles was already considered very knowledgeable. After interacting with both sides for a long time, Jin realized that this group was always on guard, as if someone would rush out and attack them at any time. Even Jin himself was secretly on guard. For example, Louise and the woman always walked behind him. He found it interesting and purposely stopped to pick an unknown wildflower to study. Louise and the woman also stopped. They could stare at Han Jin's back as they walked, but they would never show their backs to him. This was not a big deal. If he, Sunir, and the others met a stranger of unknown origin and strength in the forest, they would also be on guard. Han Jin could also see that they were in a hurry to get out of the forest. They were also moving very quickly, which made him satisfied. If they were to delay, even if they did not know the way, even if they might be attacked by the Kingdom of Magnificent Light, Han Jin would still leave. This was because he really could not afford a delay. They chatted as they hurried along. In the blink of an eye, a few hours had passed. The others were still fine, but the woman could not hold on any longer. She staggered as she walked, and her head was covered in sweat. Her snow-white calves were also scratched by the grass and branches. Panwen frowned and immediately ordered the group to stop and rest. A person wearing a priest's robe came from behind and walked to the woman's side and cast a healing spell. This was not an ordinary priest. Under the strong light, Han Jin could clearly see that the wounds on the woman's legs were slowly healing. However, her strength was already exhausted. She did not pick a spot and sat down on the grass. She could not even lift her head. "Cheer up," Panwen said softly. The woman was shocked. She hurriedly tried to stand up, but her legs were weak and she fell on her back in the grass. Panwen shook his head and ignored the woman. Han Jin could not stand it anymore and reached out his hand. However, the woman timidly glanced at Han Jin and did not respond to Han Jin's friendliness. She struggled to sit up on her own. Her eyes were wet, but she tried hard to control her tears so that they would not fall. The strong men searched for dry grass and branches and lit 2 bonfires. The woman carefully approached the bonfire and felt the warmth of the fire. Her expression looked better. It was obvious that she was cold and tired. She did not dress like this on purpose. Someone must have asked her to dress like this. "Something's not right," Louise suddenly said softly. Her nose twitched hard as if she was sniffing the air. Her eyes changed as well. The liveliness and naivety in her eyes were gone, replaced by a sharpness that resembled a blade. After knowing her for a few hours, Han Jin had always thought that Louise was a silly, spoiled, and inexperienced young lady. However, when he saw Louise's expression, he realized that he was wrong. Perhaps she was really a little silly, but she was definitely not a spoiled young lady. At that moment, a silent black light flew across the grass and headed straight for the ignorant woman. Han Jin's expression was a little hesitant. He did not know if he should save her, but the arrow flew very quickly. In the time he hesitated, it had already closed in on the woman. Han Jin could only reach out his hand to meet the arrow. Louise's movements were a little faster than Han Jin's. It was not that her reaction was faster than Han Jin's. Instead, when she discovered the arrow, she immediately made her move. A shiny dagger appeared in her left hand. With a light flick, the arrow suddenly changed direction. It flew past the woman's neck and nailed itself to a tree trunk. The arrow was very powerful. Most of the shaft was embedded in the tree trunk. Only a small portion of the arrow's feathers were left trembling violently. Louise's body turned and hid behind a tree. Her movements were as nimble as a cat's. When her body was blocked by the tree trunk, she had already taken the longbow from her back. Without pausing for a moment, she dashed out from the other side of the tree trunk. The longbow was drawn to the shape of a full moon, and a powerful arrow shot out. Shrill screams came from afar. Panwen had already taken out his magic staff. A huge magic shield appeared out of thin air, enveloping everyone within. Outside the magic shield, the air was rushing rapidly. A surging fog gradually formed, completely covering the people within the shield. However, the fog was very strange. Although they could see the fog, their vision was not affected at all. They could still see the scenery in the distance. As for whether they could see in from the outside, Han Jin did not know. The guards gathered in the center, surrounding the dazed woman. Only then did she react. She also took the frightening longbow from her back. She drew an arrow in a very standard posture and knocked down the bowstring. However, she did not draw the longbow. Although her body was straight, her slightly trembling legs gave her away. Louise suddenly let out a sharp roar. Nicola's lackeys! Can't you all act like men and stand out in the open? Louise was not protected by the magic shield. Judging from Panvin's expression, it was as if he was not worried about Louise's safety at all. Louise's standing posture was a little strange. Her legs were in front of her and behind her, half squatting and half standing. Her entire back formed an arc. She looked like a lazy worm that wanted to curl up into a ball, but also like a ferocious beast that was about to go berserk. Her face was wild and arrogant, with a hint of unruliness. Her gaze was as sharp as a knife, mixed with a trace of contempt and mockery. Hanjin never knew that a girl could show such an expression. If he had to describe it, it would be like a cat, exploding. When he was a private investigator, his female assistant had a Brazilian cat and a shepherd dog. Usually, the cat and the dog got along well. However, once when he and his female assistant went out for a morning exercise, the cat caught a mouse out of nowhere and was playing with it with its claws. The dog suddenly rushed up and took the mouse away. The cat's back bent into an arc, and it stared at the dog with a deadly stare. It let out a terrifying scream and then rushed up. In fact, the shepherd dog was several times bigger than the cat, but it was bitten by the cat. In the end, it had no choice but to abandon the mouse and run away. His female assistant went up to stop it, but she was bitten by the cat as well. She was so sad that she cried out loud afterward. At this moment, Louise and the cat that was about to attack were 80 to 90% similar in spirit. They were angry and crazy. Chapter 249. Suddenly, Louise's body jerked backward. At the same time, a figure appeared in front of Louise, and the dagger in his hand missed Louise by a hair's breadth. Louise's performance was very swift and fierce. She actually threw her longbow and pulled out her dagger. She leaned forward, but the thief's fighting spirit didn't lose out to hers at all. The two of them quickly became entangled in a fight. An inch shorter, an inch closer. The two people with daggers fought fiercely, and the scene was extremely thrilling. Their attacking styles were very similar. Stab, flick, stab, and slash. Their movements were fierce, swift, and smooth. Everyone was desperately trying to create wounds on the other. In order to protect themselves, they had no choice but to quickly move to their right. In order to injure their opponent, they had no choice but to do their best to close in on their opponent. In the end, the two people were like running in circles, switching positions several times in an instant. "It's done," Panvin exclaimed. The woman hurriedly raised her longbow and aimed at the thief, but she had no strength to pull the bowstring. Instead, she dropped the arrow on the ground. Hanjin walked towards the woman, and the guard's eyes immediately focused on Hanjin. Hanjin smiled, bent down, picked up the arrow, and handed it to the woman. The woman hesitated for a moment and reached out to take it. Unexpectedly, Hanjin suddenly put the arrow away, then asked softly, "What's the relationship between Lola and you?" I'm Lola." The woman looked at the expressions of the people around her and answered timidly. "Oh." Hanjin smiled, then handed the arrow back to her again. This time, the woman was afraid that Hanjin would play tricks on her, so she snatched it back as fast as she could. Panvin had been wanting to cast magic to help the battle, but the two people fighting were moving too quickly. He was afraid of accidentally hurting his companions, so he could only watch from the side. Now that he heard the conversation behind him, he could not help but turn his attention to Hanjin. "Be careful, they're about to cast magic," Hanjin said calmly. Panvin was stunned. At this moment, clear magic waves came from afar. Panvin's expression changed drastically. He hurriedly raised his magic staff and chanted spell. As the magical waves became more and more intense, 3 flaming meteors suddenly appeared in the sky, falling in a triangular formation. With a loud boom, the 3 meteors exploded on the magic barrier. The magic barrier was only able to block the magic attack. The guards inside the barrier were shaken, and the woman fell on her back. The frightening giant bow was also thrown far away. The magic barrier shook violently for a few times, then returned to its original state. Louise's battle was also over. Thieves were different from warriors. Maintaining high speed and maintaining high tension meant that the battle would not last long. Louise was fine, but the thief's right shoulder had a wound that was neither shallow nor deep. He was the first to retreat from the battle, then cast invisibility. Louise flipped over, picked up her longbow, and cast invisibility as well. Panvin had finished his incantation. He raised his magic staff into the air, and an even bigger magic barrier appeared, covering the magic barrier in front of him. Then, Panvin pointed his magic staff outwards, and a turbulent airflow swept out. The two people who were invisible just now were revealed in the airflow. They were stunned for a moment, but they immediately rushed towards each other at the same time, and once again, they were engaged in a fierce battle. Although Panvin's status was not as high as Louise's, he did not seem to care about Louise's safety at all. It was unknown whether it was because of confidence or something else. Panvin breathed a sigh of relief, and his gaze fell on Hanjin. "Sir Raphael, how did you know that, Lola?" Before he could finish, a huge fireball suddenly exploded in the sky, and then a fierce fire dragon swooped down. Before Panvin could react, it had already crashed into the magic barrier. The magic barrier that Panvin had cast with his spell was definitely stronger than the previous one, but under the attack of the fire dragon, the magic barrier only lasted for a few seconds before it completely collapsed. In the deafening boom, the guards could no longer maintain their balance, and one by one, they fell to the ground. Even the dozen tall and handsome unicorns let out panicked cries. The frail woman was even worse. She covered her ears with her hands, and her mouth was wide open. There was even a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Within the magic barrier, there were only two people who could remain normal. One was Hanjin, and the other was Panvin. Panvin's expression changed drastically. Getting beaten up like this would not solve the problem. He wanted to walk out of the magic barrier, but his gaze swept across the guards and the unicorns. He hesitated for a moment, then stopped, raised his magic staff, and began chanting a spell. Moments later, another magic barrier opened, and then Panvin shouted, "Miss, come back quickly." Louise did not say a word. She was still fighting with the thief. Although she had a slight advantage, it was not very obvious. As soon as she spoke, the battle would immediately turn around. Panvin was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Only then did he remember Hanjin, but when he turned around, he was stunned again. Hanjin had disappeared. More than 200 feet away, a magician about 40 years old was concentrating on chanting a spell. A huge fire dragon appeared in the sky again, baring its fangs and claws as it swooped down. The magician's lips curled into a smug smile. Fire magic had always been known for its power. If the opponent was only supported by a magic barrier, the opponent would definitely be the first to run out of mana. At this moment, Hanjin's figure rose like a ghost about 30 feet behind the magician. With a wave of his hand, a dazzling green light shot out, piercing towards the magician's back. The green light arrived in the blink of an eye, but the magician's reaction was not slow either. He opened up a magic shield in time. With a boom, the magic shield was shattered by the green light before it could fully form, but the green light was also deflected far away. Hanjin moved and rushed towards the magician like lightning. He pointed his finger, and the green light spun in the air and shot towards the magician again. The magician raised his hand and released a large fireball. The large fireball collided with the green light, and the result was similar to the previous time. The large fireball was struck into a rain of fire and scattered in all directions, while the green light bounced off again. Hanjin frowned slightly and released a fire talisman with a flip of his hand. At this moment, the distance between the two was less than 30 feet. Magicians were supposed to avoid close combat with the enemy, but the magician did not panic at all. Looking at the pitifully small fireball, the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking smile, and he raised his hand to release another large fireball. The collision of fire elemental magic was extremely cruel. Whoever had the stronger spiritual power would have the upper hand. There was nothing fancy about it, and the magician didn't even care about Hanjin's little fireball. Unexpectedly, the two fireballs collided, but there was no sound. The large fireball released by the magician continued to shoot towards Han Jin, but the fire talisman released by Han Jin passed through the center of the large fireball and hit the magician's face. After all, Han Jin took the initiative. The green light and fire talisman he released were only stopped 2 to 3 meters away from the opponent. Although the magician's reaction was very fast, 2 to 3 meters was too short. He did not have the time to protect himself, and he did not pay attention to the enemy. By the time he realized something was wrong, it was all too late. The magician let out a crazy howl and tried to use his hands to put out the flames, but the 3 true fire could burn everything in the world. No matter what he used to touch it, it would only make the flames more and more, bigger and bigger. In just a moment, the magician had collapsed. His burning head had shrunk significantly, but the 3 true fire was still burning relentlessly. Han Jin narrowed his eyes and looked at the battle behind him. The magician's screams had affected the thief quite a bit. Of course, Louise would not let go of this opportunity. She held the thief tightly, and a bright dagger flew up and down, drawing out one light curtain after another, not giving the thief a chance to use his invisibility spell. Han Jin bent down and carefully searched for his spoils of war. Of course, he had to put away the magic staff, but there was also the space ring. Yelena was a magus and had high attainments in alchemy. For her, erasing the mark on the space ring was a piece of cake. After confirming that he did not miss anything, Han Jin walked quickly to the dead archer more than 30 meters away. The archer was probably the weakest in the group because he was holding a normal longbow tightly in his hand. Han Jin forcibly pulled the bow out. After observing it for a while, he curled his lips, threw it aside, and started searching again. In fact, what he was looking for was not only things that could provide energy, but also letters, maps, and so on. As long as they could provide information about this area, anything would be good. After searching a few times, Han Jin suddenly paused and dashed diagonally. At the same time, a dozen arrows were shot at him, but they all missed. Han Jin's figure had already disappeared. The next moment, Han Jin appeared hundreds of meters away. He silently looked at the trees above him. There were about a dozen archers scattered in the surrounding forest, still carefully waiting for him to appear. Han Jin could already see that Nicholas's people attached great importance to this group, so they had sent a lot of people. These archers were all late, so they probably had a unique communication signal. No matter where the battle took place, the rest of the people would quickly gather to the center of the battle. This meant that the more they fought, the more enemies there would be. Han Jin reached out his hand. The green glow retracted and flew up bit by bit. Han Jin stood at the back. None of the archers in front of him noticed him. Even the target that Han Jin had chosen was carefully observing the front through the gaps between the branches and leaves. When the green glow rose to the back of his head, he realized that something was wrong from the reflection of the leaves. Before he could turn around, the green glow had already pierced through his shoulder. The archer let out a cry of pain and fell down the tree. Han Jin had already retrieved the green glow and sunk into the ground. The archers were scattered across a wide area. It would be troublesome to kill them all. He also did not want to waste his vital energy to cast a powerful spell. Perhaps after he killed them all, a new enemy would come. It would be better to kill one of them and let him scream. In a situation where they could not find the enemy, the rest of the archers would definitely not dare to move around. They would only quietly hide there, and naturally, they would not dare to continue following. Chapter 250. When Han Jin returned to the vicinity of the magic barrier, Louise and the thief were still fighting. Pan Vin wanted to step out of the magic barrier several times, but he changed his mind in the end. He even shook his head anxiously at Han Jin when he saw that Han Jin was about to intervene. Louise was a proud girl and would never allow anyone to interfere with her battle, not even her own sister. Otherwise, she would definitely fly into a rage. "You'd better hurry up. We don't have much time," Han Jin said with a frown. Hearing Han Jin rushing her, Louise couldn't help but reveal an angry expression, and her movement slowed. The thief seized the opportunity and quickly left the battle. He turned around and pounced at Han Jin. He flung the dagger in his hand, and a cold light flashed toward Han Jin's chest. Han Jin couldn't understand. Did he look so easy to bully? He leaned to the side and dodged the cold light. The thief pounced on him, a dagger in his hand, and slashed it toward Han Jin's neck. Han Jin stretched out his left hand and grabbed the thief's right wrist. Unexpectedly, the thief's arm lowered, avoiding Han Jin's left hand, and the dagger went straight for Han Jin's left rib. The thief's attack power was inferior to that of a warrior, and their defense was also inferior. They only played the role of ambushers, relying on surprise attacks and unparalleled speed to deal damage to their enemies. The thief's body was exposed, and he had lost the advantage of surprise. In terms of speed, he was far inferior to Han Jin. Although the thief's movements were sudden, Han Jin's reaction speed was even faster. His left hand came down, and although he moved later, he accurately caught the thief's wrist in his mouth. He swung his right fist and smashed it into the thief's cheek. The thief's right hand was caught, but he didn't panic at all. He pulled back his left hand and pulled out another dagger, which he flicked toward Han Jin's palm. Han Jin's expression turned cold, and his right hand suddenly stopped moving. The thief's dagger stabbed empty air, and Han Jin's hand reached forward and grabbed the thief's left wrist. With both wrists locked, the thief finally panicked. He struggled with all his might and kicked at Han Jin's chest. Han Jin opened his mouth, and a green light shot out. The thief didn't expect there to be such a way of hurting people in the world. It was too late for him to react. Moreover, his hands were bound, and there was no room for him to move. With a squelch, the green light pierced the thief's chest and then circled around before quietly stopping above Han Jin. The light in the thief's eyes gradually dimmed, and he fell limp to the ground. By the time Louise reached him, the thief was already dead. "Hey, he's my opponent!" Louise screamed. "Are you leaving or not?" Han Jin ignored Louise. "Go, of course we're going." Pan, when hurriedly replied, "Didn't you hear me? He's my opponent." Louise said angrily, "He's the one who came to find me." Han Jin said calmly, "You're not any slower than him, but you purposely waited. Did you want to see me make a fool of myself? You didn't see it, so you're disappointed, right?" "You." With her thoughts exposed, Louise's anger lessened. "You're a magician? I'm a combat magician." Han Jin thought of an opponent he'd met in the past. "Miss, don't mess around." Panvin came out and said apologetically to Han Jin, "Sir Raphael, I'm really sorry. Our miss has a bad temper. I hope you don't mind. That fire magician just now was you? Let's talk as we walk." Han Jin looked Panvin up and down. "Why do I feel like you guys aren't in a hurry at all? What's there to be in a hurry about?" Louise pursed her lips. "Miss." Panvin looked at Louise with a reproachful gaze. The road ahead was blocked, so the whole team had to change directions. The more they walked, the more Han Jin felt that something was wrong. They were actually going east, while Han Jin was going to St. Petersburg. Wasn't this going in the opposite direction? Han Jin simply stood there without moving. Louise and Panvin also stopped and looked at Han Jin in surprise. "Mr. Panvin, I think we should split up. Can you tell me how to go around the kingdom of magnificent light?" Han Jin said calmly. Before Panvin could say anything, Louise said, "Idiot, even if you can bypass the kingdom of magnificent light with the flying speed of magic item, you will need at least 3 days to reach St. Petersburg. If you follow us, you can reach there in 2 days." "Miss, don't be rude." Panvin scolded, then smiled at Han Jin. "Mr. Raphael, please don't worry. We'll definitely get you to St. Petersburg in 2 days." Han Jin saw that Louise and Panvin didn't seem to be lying, so he shrugged and didn't say anything else. As for Louise's rude words, he didn't care if a strange little girl was civilized and polite. After walking for a while, the archers had caught up from behind. In fact, the team's speed was completely held back by the weak woman. Without her, the team's speed would be several times faster, and the enemy archers wouldn't be able to catch up so easily. If the woman was a very important person, Han Jin could understand. However, no one took her seriously, so why did they have to bring a burden with them? After a while, when the archers had formed a semicircle behind them, Han Jin couldn't take it anymore. "Can't you think of a way to speed us up?" Panvin also sensed the archers approaching, so he stopped and released a magic shield. Steam rose up and covered the entire shield. Panvin then smiled. Miss Lola is our leader. We can't abandon her. He understood what Hanjin meant. She's your leader? Hanjin frowned. He didn't believe this nonsense at all. Haha, of course not. Louise laughed. Miss. Panvin quickly stopped her. It's none of your business. Louise waved her hand impatiently. We've already done more than our mission. Even if Nicholas finds out that my sister is a fake, it's too late. Panvin shook his head helplessly. Get ready. I'm going to cast a spell. With that, he clenched his magic staff and loudly chanted spell. Outside, scattered arrows pierced through the fog and landed on the magic shield. This kind of attack couldn't break the shield, and the archers couldn't see what was inside. They were just shooting blindly and posed no threat. Panvin's magic staff slowly lit up, and dozens of strange rays of light grew out like snakes, wrapping around everyone. Then, the light shone so brightly that everyone subconsciously closed their eyes. The next moment, the scenery around them changed abruptly. To be more precise, they had been moved to an unfamiliar place. Hanjin couldn't help but be shocked. Spatial teleportation. It was actually a large-scale spatial teleportation that was similar to the effect of a teleportation magic circle. At this moment, he also understood why Panvin always hid inside the magic shield. He wanted to conserve his magic power. With their speed, they must have been surrounded more than once. Panvin's magic was their last resort. Hanjin had once warned Yelena that there was always someone better than him. It was hard to say if Yelena had taken it seriously, but he had been enlightened time and time again. Nicholas, who could trigger the hostility of heaven and earth, and Panvin, who was in front of him, were enough to shock him. If Yelena was here, she would never believe that anyone could activate spatial teleportation with their own power. This kind of magical spell did exist, but it had long been lost. Panvin's forehead was covered with sweat. He sat down in the grass and closed his eyes to meditate. Obviously, activating spatial teleportation was a huge burden. The guards surrounded Panvin and vigilantly observed their surroundings. Their indifferent expressions prove Hanjin's conjecture that this wasn't the first spatial teleportation. Hanjin looked at the scenery in the distance. The shapes of several mountains were very familiar. It seemed that Panvin's teleportation distance wasn't very far. It might have been a dozen miles, or even a dozen kilometers. However, this didn't affect the strategic importance of spatial teleportation at all. What else do you want to ask? Louise walked to Hanjin's side. Hurry up and ask him while he's meditating. Hanjin looked at Louise and suddenly said, Lola is your sister? Yes, you've heard of my sister too? Louise showed a proud expression. I heard of her a few days ago, Hanjin said indifferently. Hanjin's words greatly hurt Louise's pride. She wanted to ignore Hanjin, but she couldn't resist the interest of answering people's questions. She had always been answered by others since she was young. Being a teacher was something worth celebrating. Louise gritted her teeth and said, That's it? Is there anything else you want to know? Aren't you afraid that I'm Nicola's man? Hanjin said slowly. Mr. Panvin is meditating now. If I want to do something, you can't stop me alone. You mean us no harm. Why are you so sure? Louise hesitated for a moment, then giggled. I'm not telling you. It's a secret. She wasn't stupid. If it was related to her mission, she could say it because there was no need to keep it a secret. However, if it was related to her own interests, she wouldn't say it. At this time, Panvin opened his eyes and stood up with difficulty. Okay, let's continue forward. We must reach the elf village by tonight. Tonight? Louise was stunned. Are you sure we've lost them? If we lead the enemy to the elf village and bring disaster to the elves, my sister will scold me to death. Miss, you're underestimating the elf village's power too much. Panvin smiled. Unless Nicholas sends out the Dragon Knight, they won't be a threat to the elf village. No, my sister told me that I have to make the decision. Louise's expression suddenly became determined. Don't think I don't know what you're trying to do. You want to rope in the elves of the elven village, right? If Nicholas sends people to attack them, they'll have to pay a heavy price. If the elf village is destroyed, the homeless elves will have to come to us. If they want revenge, they'll have to rely on our support. And me, Miss. Panvin's face was a bit pale. My sister told me all this. She also told me to tell you that she can listen to you about other things, but not this. Louise glared. Chapter 251. It didn't take much effort for Hanjin to learn a lot from Louise. Of course, it was only things that Louise thought were safe to share with outsiders. Her sister, Lola, noticed that something was wrong with Nicholas's army. Coincidentally, a city lord discovered a group of unicorns in the forest and immediately reported the news to Lola. Lola had always wanted to form a personal team of unicorn knights. She took the opportunity to send Panvin and Louise, as well as her substitute, into the forest to capture the unicorns. In fact, she had secretly stayed in Moonlight City the whole time. In fact, Lola's substitute was not so weak, or she would have been exposed long ago. In the process of capturing the unicorns, they encountered a suicide attack. Lola's substitute was weakened by a curse, and the priests accompanying the team could do nothing. They could only wait until they returned to Moonlight City and find a cardinal to remove the curse. Louise's way of telling the story was frustrating. She would jump from one thing to another after just the beginning of one incident. There was no order to it at all, but Hanjin's ability to understand was very good. In the end, he got the gist of it. Panvin's life was tough. Under Louise's insistence, he had to use 3 spatial transmissions. Louise was relieved, but Panvin's stamina and mana were almost depleted. He didn't even have the strength to stand up. The unicorns had just been tamed and couldn't accept the fate of being ridden, so they could only be supported by others. At night, the team approached a mountain. In Hanjin's opinion, there was a dead end ahead, so they should go around it. However, Louise, who was in the lead, did not seem to know anything and just kept walking forward. Hanjin knew that this was related to the elf village, so he did not say anything and just quietly followed behind. Walking to the bottom of the mountain, there was a high cliff in front of them. The trees here were extremely lush, and the grass under their feet was like a green pond. Even the mountain walls were covered in dense vines. Louise was looking around when a figure suddenly jumped out from the vines. Upon closer inspection, it was a female elf. No wonder it was difficult for others to discover her. Her battle dress and leather armor were all green. In this forest, there were hiding places everywhere. Unless one could sense the aura of life or had other abilities, it was impossible to discover her with one's sight. Louise and the elf exchanged a few affectionate words. The elf waved his hand, and the vines on the mountain wall slowly parted, revealing a small path that was wide enough for one person to pass through. Louise turned around to greet the elf and walked into the crack first. After walking for about 30 to 40 meters, the path ahead suddenly opened up. A small plain appeared in front of everyone. With the help of the moonlight, Hanjin could clearly see that there were dozens of straw huts in the center of the plain. Near the straw huts were hundreds of crooked, withered trees. This plain was a world full of vitality. Compared to the surrounding environment, those withered trees seemed out of place. It seemed that the population of the elf village wasn't large. Panwin had said that the elf village was very strong. That was too exaggerated. Could it be that all the elves here were high-grade professionals? A strange sound came and attracted Hanjin's attention. He looked in the direction of the sound and found that there was a huge cave in the mountain wall. The cave was about 30 meters tall and more than 20 meters wide. It was pitch black inside, and he couldn't see what was inside. The lights in the straw hut lit up, and a female elf in her 20s came out with her clansmen. Elves lived very long lives. The so-called age referred to human standards. Louise ran over with a smile. The female elf took Louise's hand and whispered something. It probably wasn't their first time meeting, because the female elf's attitude was very amiable, and her face was full of affection. Just as they were talking, a few younger female elves ran over from the back of the village, chatting and laughing. Louise let out a scream and immediately got into a mess with the other female elves. Louise's personality was too unique. She would always scream when she was angry, and it was the same when she saw her friends. It made people not know whether to laugh or cry. The female elf in the lead led Louise into the village. What was shocking was that the withered trees by the village were actually living creatures. They retreated to the side to make way. Hanjin was shocked. Only now did he see that those weren't withered trees, but tree demons. The unicorns at the back of the group had always been very obedient, but when they reached the village, they gradually became restless. They let out cheerful cries from their noses and ran around the grassland nonstop. Some even ran near the tree demon and cautiously observed it. A few strong men in the group hurriedly rushed out and restrained the unicorns, afraid that they would cause trouble. Under the lead of the female elf, everyone walked into a tall, thatched hut. If one were to talk about living conditions, this place was very simple and crude, but it was full of the aura of nature. Furthermore, it was very tidy and exuded a refreshing fragrance. There were no tables or chairs in the straw hut, only a few beautifully carved tree stumps. Beside the stumps were cushions woven from grass. However, there were too many guests in the hut, so there weren't enough seats. Most of the people stood there. Hanjin was lucky enough to get one, and he sat down cross-legged. The female elf in the lead called a little elf over and whispered a few words. The little elf ran out and soon came back with a wooden bucket. Another elf placed a cup on each stump. This was the only thing Hanjin saw in the elven village that represented human civilization. The little elf filled each cup with water and then walked out with a wooden bucket. Louise held the cup with a smile and asked, "Blanche, how many moon wells do you have now?" "Silly child." The female elf in the lead smiled. "It's not easy to keep one moon well running. Many large elven settlements don't even have one moon well. That's because they're useless." Louise curled her lips and drank the cup. Blanche smiled bitterly and shook her head. She was already used to Louise's blabbermouth, so she didn't say anything. Hanjin wanted to drink as well, but when he heard that there was only one moon well in the village, he couldn't help but pause. The female elves who came later were all wet, and their hair was still dripping water. It wasn't bathwater, was it? Even if the elves were very clean, drinking bathwater was a different matter. Hanjin had just put down the cup when Pan Wen's actions attracted his attention. Not only did Pan Wen drink all the water in the cup, he even used his tongue to lick the remaining water droplets on the sides of the cup. When he realized that he had attracted attention, he resentfully put the cup down on the stump. Hanjin couldn't figure out Pan Wen's strength, but he remembered what Louise said. Lola would listen to Pan Wen in other aspects. It was obvious that Pan Wen was Lola's right-hand man. For someone like him to treasure the water in the cup so much, there must be something about him that was worth treasuring. Thinking of this, Hanjin no longer hesitated. He picked up the cup and took a sip. Then his eyes suddenly widened. An extremely pure yin-chi slid down his throat and circled around his chest and abdomen. The energy contained in the water wasn't much. It was only a few times more than the thunderbird meat he ate some time ago. But this was pure lunar aura. Even compared to the legendary jade nectar, the effect wasn't much different. Hanjin drank the water in a few gulps. Like Pan Wen, he reluctantly licked the remaining water droplets with the tip of his tongue. Pan Wen let out a low chuckle. Hanjin slowly put the cup down on the stump. If he knew these elves, he would definitely ask them to give him more water, even if it meant paying a price. Unfortunately, there was no room for him to speak here. He was lucky to be able to drink a cup. He could only remain silent. Louise's eyes moved, and she smiled. "Blanche, don't be so stingy. This is an important guest from afar. It seems he hasn't drunk enough yet." Hanjin smiled and didn't say anything polite. He wasn't a pretentious person, but he felt that Louise was much more pleasing to the eye. "Oh." Blanche also smiled, then gave an elf a look. "Your sister recruited another powerful assistant? I should congratulate her." "Him? He's not one of us." "What? He's not one of you?" Blanche's expression changed drastically. Louise knew that she had misspoken again. She stuttered as she explained, "Sister Blanche, don't misunderstand. He's not an enemy." "Fool!" Blanche angrily roared and suddenly stood up. The elves who had been smiling just a moment ago had all drawn their swords in an instant. Their longbows were all drawn, and a dozen arrows were pointed at Hanjin from afar. Hanjin was stunned. He didn't know whether to stand up or continue sitting. He never thought that drinking water would cause trouble. Speak. Who sent you? What are you trying to do by sneaking into the elven village? Blanche shouted harshly. Sister Blanche, let me explain. Louise anxiously grabbed Blanche's arm. He's Odd's friend. He came all the way here just to find Odd, Louise said as she gave Hanjin a look. Hanjin was stunned. The person he was looking for was indeed Odd, but didn't Louise know many light knights? Why did she only mention Odd? But the situation was pressing, and he didn't have time to think. He nodded lightly. Odd. Blanche's expression softened. You're friends with Odd? Blanche blinked hard. If this could be replaced, she would definitely nod for Hanjin. Hanjin sighed and shook his head. He couldn't pretend. If Blanche asked about Odd and he couldn't answer, then it would be impossible to explain. Louise stomped her feet in anger and stared at Hanjin with an exasperated look. Blanche, don't get me wrong, she shouted. He really is our friend. He killed many of Nicola's dogs during the day. Really, we all saw it with our own eyes. Blanche snorted coldly. Louise, you're too kind. Hanjin's figure suddenly sank down and disappeared without a trace. Then, the elves outside cried out in alarm. The elves in the hut all rushed outside, but Hanjin suddenly rose up behind Blanche. Blanche reacted quickly and kicked Hanjin in the chest with her heel. She then took out her longbow from her space ring. By the time she turned around, the longbow was already drawn. Hanjin leaned to the side and patted Blanche's shoulder. His body tilted and disappeared into the ground again. Hanjin then appeared in his original position and looked at Blanche quietly. The hut was silent. Hanjin was able to succeed so easily because his magic exceeded everyone's expectations, but it was undeniable that if he wanted to hurt someone, Blanche would have been dead long ago. Ahem. Hanjin coughed dryly. Is there any more water? Chapter 252. Blanche's expression kept changing, and the elves slowly lowered their longbows. It was obvious that the elves of this village were kind by nature. They had been hostile toward Hanjin because they thought he was a spy who had infiltrated the village. Now that they saw that Hanjin didn't intend to hurt them, their hostility gradually weakened. Blanche was the first to come back to her senses. She gave the elf at the door a look, and the elf hurried out. A moment later, the little elf who had delivered the water carried the wooden bucket back into the hut. She looked around, then walked up to Hanjin and filled the cup with water. Hanjin picked up the cup and drank in one gulp. Comfortable. Forget about the situation or the battle. Just these 2 cups of water made his trip worth it, although he didn't absorb much energy from them. When he faced the test of the immortal of Tai one day, the Tai Chi he absorbed today would be of great help to him. What spell did you use just now? Louise asked in a daze. She wasn't the only one curious. Panvin and Blanche all pricked up their ears. That spell had the same effect as teleportation. A magician who could continuously teleport was close to being immortal. Other than time, nothing could defeat him. Mother Earth's embrace. Hanjin made it up. Bah, what kind of nonsense is this? How come I've never heard of it? Louise didn't believe him at all. There are many things you haven't heard of. Hanjin smiled. Only then did he realize that the little elf hadn't left. He looked again and saw that the wooden bucket was still half full. Hanjin's heart began to itch again. Greed was a sin. As a cultivator, Hanjin couldn't control his desire, but he was too embarrassed to ask for more. He looked at the little elf and then at the empty cup, hoping that she would understand his hint. The little elf understood. Perhaps it was because she had never seen such an insatiable person before. She glared at Hanjin and then turned her gaze to Blanche. Blanche nodded. The little elf pouted and picked up the wooden bucket grumpily to refill Hanjin's cup. This time, she had learned her lesson and ran out before Hanjin drank, afraid that Hanjin wouldn't stop drinking. In the end, she was too young and underestimated Hanjin's sense of shame. He had never done anything for these elves and was being treated for no reason. Drinking 3 cups was already Hanjin's limit. Of course, if the little elf poured more for Han Jin, he would definitely continue drinking, but he wouldn't ask for more in any way. Honorable guest, may I ask where you're from? Ask me, I know. Louise patted her small chest. He's from the Northeast. Blanche rolled her eyes at Louise. Why are you looking for Odd? Yes. What is it? Can you tell me about it? Isn't your request a little too much? Han Jin smiled. It's the same if you tell her, Louise said casually. She's Odd's wife. Is there a need to keep it a secret? Han Jin was stunned. His intuition told him that Louise wasn't lying. If she really wanted to trick him, she could have found a suitable excuse. A light night and an elf. Han Jin smiled bitterly. What? Do you think I'm not good enough for Odd? Or Odd isn't good enough for me? Blanche said calmly. No. Han Jin paused. A light knight believes in the god of light, and an elf believes in the goddess of nature. This seems a little, I admit that our different beliefs have indeed brought us a lot of trouble. That's why I'm in the elven village, and he's always in his army. Blanche sighed, but when feelings burn like fire, it's hard to control yourself. We used to think that we could overcome all obstacles. Perhaps you haven't experienced this feeling, so you don't understand. Blanche's words sounded pretentious, but her expression was calm, as if she was talking about something that had nothing to do with her. Han Jin was silent for a moment, then smiled. I understand. Okay, you should believe us now, right? Louise couldn't help but ask. Why are you looking for Odd? Han Jin looked around. Everyone here seems to hate Nicholas. Of course. Do you hate him too? Louise said with a smile. Comrade. She now considered Han Jin a comrade. I've never seen him before. Han Jin muttered to himself. Nicholas didn't know Han Jin's existence at all, so it was impossible for him to set up a trap for him. He decided to trust the people around him. Actually, I don't know Odd either. I came here because I was entrusted by someone. Who? Archbishop Jedis. Archbishop Jedis? Blanche and the others couldn't help but stand up. Panvin, who was watching from the side, was also stunned. You all know him? Han Jin asked. Nonsense, Louise said angrily. Among those fools in the Vatican, he's the only one worthy of respect. After that, Louise realized that she had said something wrong. She sneaked a glance at Blanche and added, Oh, there's one more. Our knight Odd. You're from the Northeast? Why did Archbishop Jedis go to the Northeast? Blanche was stunned. I'm from the Northeast, but I met Archbishop Jedis in the Teresham Mountains. Why didn't he come? Because he was attacked by someone and couldn't come. Attacked? Blanche's eyes widened. Who dares attack him? Nicholas. Blanche, Louise, and Panvin were dumbfounded. Their faces turned pale, and Louise's body trembled slightly. After a while, she suddenly jumped to her feet. Nicola has decided to make a move, hasn't he? Idiot. Jedis is also an idiot. My sister told him so many times that if Nicholas really wanted to fight, the first person he would kill would be him. Why didn't he be more careful? Idiot. Blanche and Panvin were still dumbfounded, unable to speak. The significance of this news to them was too great. A ferocious beast out of its cage was bound to set off a storm of blood and carnage. Louise screamed even louder. And you? Why didn't you tell us earlier? Do you think I should tell anyone I meet? Why should I believe you? Han Jin asked. Louise was speechless for a moment, but she was still unwilling to give up. Her eyes flashed left and right, as if she was looking for something to vent her anger on. When did you meet Jedis? Blanche asked. About almost 10 days ago. 10 days? It's too late. Blanche looked desperate. Let's go to the Vatican. Panvin shouted. His voice was originally very old, but now it was sharp and trembling like Louise's. Only the Pope can stop Nicholas's madness. It's useless. Han Jin shook his head. Jedis told me that the only hope is to find Odd, expose Nicholas's conspiracy, and bring the Knights of Light and the Cardinals out of St. Petersburg before Nicholas acts. Who told you that it's useless to find the Pope? Panvin shouted. Jedis said so. Han Jin hesitated and felt that there was no need to keep it a secret. The divine crown was lost more than 100 years ago, and the Pope doesn't have the ability to open the gates of heaven. That's impossible. You're saying that the Vatican doesn't have the ability to restrain Nicholas? Louise's expression suddenly became gloomy. From the beginning to the end, they've been emboldened to scare Nicholas. When they can't scare him anymore, they're done for. Although your words are extreme, Han Jin paused and nodded. But that's the truth. Louise glared at Han Jin fiercely. Han Jin didn't know if Han Jin had offended her or if she thought that he was a member of the Vatican. Han Jin looked around. Jidis once said that the most terrifying thing about Nicholas wasn't his scheming, but his unfathomable strength. Scheming wouldn't be able to destroy everything. If one person couldn't do it, they could gather everyone's intelligence. Moreover, Jidis, who never lied, could force Nicholas to maintain the status quo and not dare to cross the line for several years. In terms of scheming, Jidis wasn't much worse than Nicholas, but when it came to Nicholas' sword, he was at his wits' end. Jidis admitted that even if he knew that Nicholas wanted to kill him, he wouldn't be able to win or escape. Only death awaited him. Theoretically speaking, the only one who could stop Nicholas was the Pope. Using the divine crown to open the gate of heaven, the Pope could summon dozens or even hundreds of angels to help him in battle, depending on the level of the power of faith. This was a power that even Dragon City and Dragon Realm had to be cautious of. In comparison, the powerful professionals under Nicholas, including Nicholas himself, were too weak. Han Jin wanted to pass on Jedis' words to them and tell them not to underestimate Nicholas, but now he found that it was unnecessary. Who would dare to underestimate Nicholas? On the contrary, everyone here showed fear, which was enough to prove Nicholas's image and status in their hearts. Jedis also said that another terrifying thing about Nicholas was that he had a huge and complete state apparatus. Nicholas treated his followers well from the bottom of his heart. Similarly, the advanced professionals were loyal to him from the bottom of their hearts. The generals were loyal to him from the bottom of their hearts. The people of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light also supported him from the bottom of their hearts. Nicholas was able to command the Kingdom of Magnificent Light with ease. His will was the direction of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light. There was no hesitation, no doubt, and no opposition. There was only madness and obedience. It was a different kind of belief. Nicholas was the god of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light. Just like the Knight of Light who believed in the God of Light, the Kingdom of Magnificent Light also had believers of the Holy See. However, Jedis believed that if those believers had to choose between the God of Light and Nicholas, most of them would choose the latter, because God's grace was too ethereal, while Nicholas's actions were real. Blanche suddenly stood up. Didn't Jedis say we still have a chance? Come with me. First of all, thank you brothers Sleepy and Starmoon for helping me manage the book reviews. Actually, I should thank them in person, but when I go online, it's always after midnight. My friends list is almost all black and white, and I can't find them. During this period, I've been very upset. Pharyngitis has been tormenting me for almost half a year. It's always good, bad, bad, good, good, and painful. There's another reason. When I was young, I was poisoned by a dream of the Red Chamber. I thought that women were made of water, and that they needed to be loved and protected. Even if I occasionally met a wanton one, I could respect her. I thought that girls would never want to fall into depravity, and that it was because they were hurt by men that they went downhill. In the past, when I broke up with my girlfriend, I would never say anything hurtful. It was fate that brought us together, and we parted on good terms. But now, I'm completely speechless. How should I put it? To completely familiarize herself with a strange man, this process is irresistible to her. It's her nature. It's her nature. What's even more infuriating is that I met many of her classmates and friends through her. I became friends with them. But when I was with her, my friends gathered together and laughed. No one warned me about anything. After we broke up, they all confided in me about how she used to be and what she did. They even congratulated me and said that breaking up was the right thing to do. Why didn't anyone say anything at that time? Were they all laughing at me? Maybe it's because I was too young when I read Poisonous Grass, or maybe it's because I yearned for the concept of family too much. After so many years of ups and downs in society, I've always maintained an attitude of appreciation, trust, and modesty toward girls. Also, I think that when two people are together, they shouldn't let their imaginations run wild. Only by giving more than the other person does it prove that I like the other person more. Now, it seems that my head has been kicked by a donkey. Play, I know I'll play too. Also, I found that playing these few days is very good for inspiration. It's much better than being cooped up at home all day. I only saved some words at the beginning of this book, but I used them all when I was sick. After that, I couldn't save anymore. But after playing for a few days, I actually saved more than 10,000 words. It's amazing. Maybe my previous attitude toward life was a fundamental mistake. Chapter 253. I'm angry. Do you understand? I'm very, very angry. A thunderous sound came from the 30-meter-tall black hole, and a turbulent air current rushed out of the hole, blowing Blanche's hair into a mess. The ground shook slightly, and then a huge figure appeared in front of everyone. A dragon. A real dragon. The dragon's body was about 30 meters long, not including its tail. It opened its mouth in anger and looked terrifying. Judging from the size of its mouth, it could easily swallow 7 or 8 people. Blanche was actually very tall, but she was only a little taller than the dragon's feet, which made her look very pitiful. The dragon's wingspan was almost 50 meters long, and when it flapped its wings, it cast a shadow that covered half of the plain under the moonlight. The tree spirits in the village didn't think much of it, perhaps because they were used to it, but the unicorns were not. They ran around in a mess and screamed in pain. Little Blanche, tell me, how will you appease my anger? The dragon lowered its head and roared, and the air it breathed out blew the sand and pebbles on the ground. The first sentence sounded aggressive, but the second sentence made everyone speechless. Go dance for me. I want to see you dance while bathing. Murphy, I don't have time to joke with you. Blanche yelled. Joke? The giant dragon lowered its head and looked at Blanche. Its lantern-like eyes blinked a few times, then it blew at Blanche frivolously. Due to its size, its breath was not something that ordinary people could withstand. Only Hanjin, Panvin, and Louise were able to stay still, while the other elves involuntarily stepped back. Blanche's long skirt suddenly flew up, revealing a pair of slender and white thighs. Murphy! Blanche screamed while holding her dress down. All right, all right. The dragon yawned lazily and suddenly looked up at the night sky. I'm Miss Dragon City. Little Blanche, how about this? I'll try to go there as soon as possible. When I come back, Blanche was stunned. Murphy, you don't want to help us? Is that so? Little Blanche, you look nervous. The dragon named Murphy spread his wings and looked like he was about to fly high. Then he slowly closed his wings. This means that even with my strength, I can't solve your problem, right? Blanche bit her lip and didn't reply. You are Aud's wife. If you offend the Holy See, Aud will definitely help you. Lola is your best friend, so of course you won't target her. And the answer is very clear. You have offended someone you shouldn't have, Nicholas. Murphy slowly bent down, his big mouth almost touching the ground. He stared at Blanche. Little Blanche, I still need 30 to 50 years to become an upper-rank gold dragon. I can't help you now. Are you scared? Have you forgotten your promise? Scared? Maybe a little. 30 to 50 years is just a blink of an eye for me. My strength will be greatly improved. Little Blanche, must you make things difficult for me at a time like this? Murphy's tone was a little strange. You are begging me to kill me. And Nicholas has a very good relationship with the Dragon Realm. He has 4 Dragon Knight subordinates working for him. Even if you want to fight, you should at least let me go back to Dragon City to get help, right? I'm not asking you to fight. I just want you to send us to St. Petersburg. Blanche said word by word. What? Murphy was stunned. Then, he let out a series of loud and hearty laughter. Of course, of course. How could the generous Murphy refuse a friend's request? Absolutely no problem. Unfortunately, his response was too late and had already hurt Blanche's heart. Blanche didn't say any words of gratitude. She just looked at Murphy silently. From a physical point of view, a dragon's skin was, of course, extremely thick. It could be described as invulnerable. It was truly invulnerable. However, Murphy looked embarrassed. His voice became gentle, and he even took the initiative to lie down on the ground. "Are you in a hurry? Come up. I'll take you away now." After Blanche said a few words to the elves behind her, she stepped on Murphy's wings and walked up to Murphy's back. Han Jean and the others also followed. They couldn't take Louise's guards with them. Except for Lola's substitute, the others, including the unicorn, were all left in the elven village. Pan then released a magic shield to cover everyone on the dragon's back. Murphy waited for them to get ready, then ran a few steps, flapped his wings quickly, and rose into the sky. Yelena had once commented that Han Jin's flying speed was second only to the Fire Phoenix and the dragon. But now, Han Jin realized that the gap between them was so huge. The wingspan of Murphy's wings was close to 50 meters. Every time he flapped, he could cover a distance of more than 100 meters. His thunderous roar echoed in everyone's ears. Pan Wen's magic shield kept changing its shape as if it was under attack. In fact, it was only affected by the airflow. No wonder Louise dared to say that they could return to St. Petersburg in 2 days. With such an unimaginable speed, even 2 days was a conservative number. Along the way, Murphy started to talk to Blanche, but its cowardice had already made Blanche disappointed, so she ignored Murphy. Later, Murphy also didn't bother to talk to her anymore, so it just kept flying forward. The moon set and the sun rose. Everyone rested for half a day. When the sun rose for the second time, they finally arrived at St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg was a large castle, and the people living inside were all members of the Holy See. The appearance of the castle was very simple and square, but as the symbol of the Holy See, no one would dare to attack this place under normal circumstances. Therefore, St. Petersburg didn't have any defensive facilities, and the width and height of the walls were very ordinary. The main purpose of building this castle was to separate the forces of Nicholas and Lola, and the Holy See had been struggling in recent years, so they wouldn't invest their funds in this place. Looking down from the sky, St. Petersburg seemed very peaceful. Murphy had good eyesight, so he suddenly exclaimed, "Why do I see Nicholas's flag?" "What?" Blanche and the others were shocked. They all moved to the edge of the magic shield and looked down. That's Nicholas's flag?" Han Jean said in a daze. It was too familiar. White background and red sun. Wasn't that the plaster flag? The only difference was that the edge of the red sun was densely covered with golden rays. The flag of the so-called Kingdom of Magnificent Light had no problem in using such a shape, but Han Jean felt weird about it. "Yes." Panwin nodded with a serious expression. "What's going on? Did Nicholas start the war? Did he take down St. Petersburg?" "No, there are no traces of war here," Blanche said. "Murphy, come closer." "No problem." Hearing that Blanche was finally talking to him, Murphy was very happy. He flapped his wings and moved closer to the city wall. At this moment, something like a bubble flashed by. Then, a dozen soldiers and a giant ballista suddenly appeared there. A giant arrow about 7 or 8 meters long was shot directly at Murphy. Obviously, there was a magic shield that blocked the soldiers and the ballista. The magic shield was not broken until the ballista attacked. Murphy let out an earth-shattering scream and desperately slid to the side, but the speed of the crossbow arrow was too fast and it caught him off guard. With a puff sound, the giant arrow had pierced deeply into his abdomen. "Demon Annihilation Crossbow." "Murphy, are you okay?" Blanche yelled in shock. Murphy didn't have time to answer. He flapped his wings desperately and tried to lower his flying altitude. He was almost flying close to the ground. He reacted correctly. The Demon Annihilation Crossbow could adjust the shooting angle, but if he flew below the city wall, the crossbow would not be able to attack. Although he was already injured, Murphy flew desperately, and his speed was much faster than when he came here. In just a moment, the vast St. Petersburg had already become a small square. "Murphy, are you okay? Say something." Blanche knelt on the dragon's back and patted its scales, but Murphy still didn't say anything. He just kept flying forward. The power of the Demon Annihilation Crossbow could only be known after tasting it. When he came here, he talked a lot because he could handle it with ease. Now, he was afraid that he would fall to the ground if he let out a sigh of relief. Gosh, a dragon knight! Why is there a dragon knight in St. Petersburg? Panwin suddenly exclaimed. Everyone looked back and saw a faint black flying out of the small square and following them from a distance. Although it was very far away, they all felt an indescribable pressure. Panwin immediately released the X-ray eye spell. A giant dragon with golden scales appeared in front of everyone. On the back of the golden dragon, there was a knight in his 40s. He held a blue spear in his hand and had a contemptuous smile on his face. Other than Hanjin, everyone held their breaths. Their hearts sank. Black dragons, gold dragons, and silver dragons were all superior dragons. They each had their own strengths. In terms of flying speed, the silver dragon was first and the gold dragon was second. This meant that even if Murphy wasn't injured and didn't fly for a long time, he couldn't compete with the gold dragon in terms of speed. Hanjin sighed in his heart. It was time for him to leave. Although Louise and the others were all enemies of Nicholas and were comrades in the same trench as him, there were differences between comrades. If Sunir was here, he would have to fight the gold dragon with his life. Even if he couldn't win, he would have to fight. There was no need to die for these people who had nothing to do with him. Murphy also sensed the danger behind him. He flapped his wings even faster. Blanche saw that Murphy still didn't say anything. She was so anxious that she cried. "Murphy, what's wrong? Say something. Say something." Chapter 254. People had different personalities, and it was difficult to find two people who were exactly the same in the world. At most, they would be somewhat similar. Some people were swift and decisive, while others liked to be slow and sluggish. Some liked challenges, while others liked to be calm. Everyone had their own reasons for their choices and preferences, and they could not be judged by right or wrong. The Dragon Knight, chasing after them, was probably a sinister character. He knew that Murphy was injured, but he did not rush to catch up. Instead, he just followed behind unhurriedly. After an unknown amount of time, a sparse forest could be seen in front of them, and Murphy's flying speed suddenly slowed down. He had been holding on for a while, and now he could not hold on any longer. He could not even maintain his balance, let alone continue flying. As Blanche screamed, Murphy slammed into the forest. One tree after another was broken by Murphy. In the end, Murphy rolled on the ground in a very unsightly posture. Fortunately, most of the people on his back were high-level professionals, and they all jumped off Murphy's back. Hanjin caught Lola's substitute in time and landed firmly on the ground with a flash of his sword. Murphy rolled on the ground a few times before he struggled to get up. This guy used to like to talk nonsense, but now it had become a completely different person. In fact, it did not have the energy to talk anymore. Its chest was heaving violently, and the air coming out of its mouth was like a rhythmic gust of wind surging in the forest. Broken branches and leaves were peeled off and flew far away like raindrops. "Murphy!" Blanche's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she rushed to Murphy. Only then did she see that the huge arrow had pierced deeply into Murphy's abdomen, and the tail was only a meter long. That was a huge arrow that was 7 or 8 meters long. It was hard to imagine that Imo Fei could still fly so far with everyone after suffering such heavy injuries. Murphy struggled to open his wings. "I can't fly anymore. You guys go." "No, I force you to come. If you want to go, we'll go together." Blanche screamed. Little fool." Murphy laughed, and his voice rolled between heaven and earth like muffled thunder. "Ha! Let's go. Don't make my sacrifice meaningless. Let's go." Louise grabbed Blanche tightly and shouted, "Calm down, Blanche. We can't help you even if we stay. Let's go, let's go." Murphy's pupils suddenly changed color. They were originally orange-yellow, but now they turned fiery red, as if there were flames burning in them. "Don't dawdle. When they arrive, none of you will be able to leave." After that, Murphy stumbled a few steps, barely rose into the sky, and flew straight toward the black spot in the distance. "Panvin, Louise shouted as she grabbed Blanche. Panvin hurriedly began to chant, "Little Blanche, you owe me." Before the teleportation spell was cast, everyone clearly heard Murphy's howl. I knew it was not a good thing. King knew it was not a good thing. Blanche struggled like a madwoman, but Louise held her tightly, and Blanche could not break free. The next moment, Panvin finally cast the spell. The space blurred, and they appeared in another place. Panvin did not dare to breathe, and immediately began to chant again. He had exceeded his usual standards today, and cast 4 teleportations in a row. When he put down his wand, he was about to collapse. "Let's go." Louise grabbed Blanche with one hand and dragged the stumbling Panvin with the other, and continued to run into the forest. However, her strength was limited, and it was already difficult for her to control Blanche. Coupled with the half-dead Panvin, he was dragged back by Blanche as soon as he took a step. Louise shouted anxiously, "Blanche, calm down. What's the use of going back now? Go to Moonlight City and avenge Murphy is what we should do." Hanjin raised his hand and cast a charm of spirit refreshment. This spell did not have any effect on magic, but it could make up for physical strength. Panvin suddenly felt much lighter, and he could not help but look back at Hanjin. Normally, his first reaction would not be to thank Hanjin, but to ask what kind of spell it was. However, the situation was urgent, and there was no time for nonsense. He broke free from Louise, ran to the side, and grabbed Blanche's left hand. Together with Louise, they dragged Blanche forward. After a few steps, Panvin realized that Hanjin had not moved. He turned back and shouted, "Raphael, let's go. I'll stay and lure them away." "Don't worry, I will find you," Hanjin whispered. He then threw out 2 more charms, both of which landed on Louise. "Don't worry, I will find you." Like Panvin, Louise suddenly felt that her spirit had become extremely strong, as if she had endless energy. She did not say anything. She only looked deeply at Hanjin, then nodded and continued to run into the forest. Hanjin flew back diagonally on his sword. Louise and Panvin did not see a trace of shame flash across Hanjin's face. Soon, Hanjin had chosen a location. He floated in the air and quickly formed a series of incantations. One by one, the charms disappeared into the air, leaving no trace behind. What Hanjin had released was a fire-focused charm. Its effect was similar to a trap, and it could be triggered or released on its own. Although Jeddis had repeatedly warned him not to fight recklessly with the high-grade professionals under Nicholas, he could not always hide like a mouse. Without experiencing it, he would never know the difference between the two sides. Then, Hanjin threw down 9 mirrors according to the location he had chosen. He did not know if the 9 Palaces illusion matrix could trap the Dragon Knight, but when the knight rushed out of the maze, he would definitely not be able to distinguish the correct direction. Not long after, a small black dot appeared in the sky. Hanjin sighed softly. The Dragon Knight had caught up, which meant that Murphy had died in battle. The black dot grew bigger and bigger, and an unparalleled pressure shrouded the heaven and the earth. The chirping of birds and insects disappeared at the same time, and the whole forest swayed, even though there was no wind. However, Hanjin had already blessed himself with the art of spirit possession. The art of spirit possession required one to be supercilious and despise everything. Even if there were gods and Buddhas blocking his way, he would still face them without any fear. The legendary dragon's prestige, which was said to be terrifying, had no effect on Hanjin. The Dragon Knight also discovered Hanjin and sensed Hanjin's hostility. It suddenly changed its direction and swooped down. This was the first time Hanjin had observed a superior gold dragon from all directions. When he observed it with his X-ray eyes, he was far less shocked than now. The superior gold dragon was about the same length as Murphy, but in terms of momentum, the difference was too big. The upper gold dragon's body was covered with golden scales, and even its wings were golden. Streams of brilliant light were constantly flowing on the scales. It was dazzling and vigorous, elegant and majestic, and the curves of its body were extremely dynamic and beautiful. When he saw Murphy, he thought that dragons were similar monsters, but when he saw a real upper gold dragon, he realized that dragons could also be so beautiful. Hanjin slowly stretched out his hand and suddenly shouted, "Explode!" More than a dozen dazzling flames suddenly appeared in the air. The superior gold dragon's body was too big, and Hanjin's focus fire spell was not wasted at all. All of them blasted on the gold dragon's body. Before Hanjin's attack, the streams of light on the gold dragon's body were just flowing one after another. But in the exploding flames, the frequency of the streams of light suddenly increased, like a pool disturbed by stones. The next moment, the superior gold dragon passed through the flames and scathed and rushed straight toward Hanjin. Hanjin could not help but show a shocked expression. What he released was not an ordinary fire, but the Samadhi true fire, which could burn everything in the world. Even illusory ghosts would be seriously injured in the Samadhi true fire. When cultivators fought with each other, they could only disrupt or disperse the Samadhi true fire in advance. Otherwise, using a magic weapon of the water attribute could also restrain the power of the Samadhi true fire. It was incredible to forcefully collide with it with just one's physical body. Closer. The gold dragon flew closer and closer. Hanjin hesitated for a moment. He was not convinced and wanted to release other spells to try, but in the end he chose to be cautious. He turned back and retreated behind a tree, shouting in a low voice, "9 palaces illusory light, open." The 9 mirrors uniformly shot out beams of light into the sky. Then, Hanjin's body shrank and disappeared underground. Murphy was indeed dead. Regardless of whether his death was worth it or not, his life had already left him. There was a very deep hole in Murphy's neck, and his body was covered with long and short scratches. However, these wounds were not fatal and did not even bleed, because the dragon's breath had melted his scales and burned his flesh. If that was all, Murphy could still continue to fight. However, the spear in his neck had shattered his neck bone. No matter how powerful a dragon was, it could not bear this kind of injury. He could only lower his proud head. In fact, Murphy dared to fight against a superior dragon. Not only was he proud, he was also crazy. Several knights were busy working on Murphy's body. Below, a child about 10 years old stood on the back of a horse, looking at Murphy's pupils with a curious expression. Perhaps it was because the fatal injury came too quickly, or because he was unwilling to give up, Murphy's pupils did not close. The child could clearly see his own shadow. So big, the child sighed. Murphy's pupils were indeed big, at least bigger than the child's. "Hurry up," the child shouted again. "Give me the dragon crystal first, then take off the dragon scales." "Young master, that's not good." A knight timidly poked his head out. "Lord Farragon will be angry if he sees us treating a dragon like this." "So what?" The child curled his lips. "He's already dead. Why are you still pretending? Disgusting. Do what you need to do. If Farragon is not satisfied, tell him to come find me." "Young master, of course he won't dare to come find you, but..." The knight smiled bitterly. "Who dares to hurt my people?" The child glared. "Cut the crap. Hurry up. Either you skin it, or I'll skin you." The knight looked at each other and did not say anything. They knew that their young master was a man of his words. After a while, a huge dragon crystal was finally dug out. One of the knights jumped down from Murphy's body with the dragon crystal. The other knights also jumped to the ground one by one. "Wow, so big!" the child exclaimed. This was a dragon crystal so big that it made Hanjin despair. His ultimate goal was to absorb the energy of the dragon crystal. However, no matter how powerful he was, he could not eat a dragon crystal the size of a wash basin. Chapter 255. Young Master, look, the fire elements emitted by this magic crystal are very pure. It should be a green dragon that's about to evolve. "What a pity," a knight said. The child smiled and jumped off his horse. He stroked the dragon crystal and said, "What are you still standing there for? Go, take off the dragon scales." "Young master," another knight said with a difficult expression, "this is an adult dragon. With just a few of us, it's impossible. Before the knight could finish his words, a black shadow jumped out from the ground like lightning. Then, a few white flames shot out at the same time, hitting the few knights. The knight's attention was focused on the huge dragon crystal. Hanjin's attack was so close to their backs that they were caught off guard. Only one knight, who was the furthest away, turned sideways in time to avoid the fireball. The others were all hit directly. In the flickering flames, the few knights screamed together. Hanjin rushed toward his only opponent. The knight had already pulled out his long sword. Before the sword arrived, a blood-freezing cold air had already wrapped around Hanjin. Then, the knight thrust his sword at Hanjin's throat. Hanjin took a deep breath and threw another fire charm at the knight's face. He had seen Moxink and Hayden fight with each other before, and he knew that the knight in front of him was at least a 10th-grade swordsman with a strong fighting spirit. Hanjin knew that the knight in front of him was at least a 10th-grade swordmaster. The knight wanted to use his combat aura to force the fireball away, but he changed his mind when he saw the miserable state of his companion. He swung his sword and hit the fireball. With a boom, the fireball attached to the long sword and was still burning. The knight's face turned cold. He threw the long sword at Hanjin and took a step to the left. He bent down and pulled out another long sword from Screaming Knight. The knight threw the long sword at an extremely fast speed. Fortunately, Hanjin had developed a habit. Every time before a battle broke out, he would use the spirit possession technique on himself. His head tilted to the side, and the long sword shot past his neck. The turbulent wind even made the air whistle. Hanjin was no longer a rookie when it came to dangerous battles. He was fearless and continued to charge forward. He threw another fire talisman at the knight. The knight snorted, and suddenly a dazzling sword light burst out. The longsword was only a meter long, but at this moment, a 2 to 3 meter long sword light appeared on the longsword. It was as if the longsword was solid. The longsword then swept with all its strength. The fire talisman released by Hanjin was immediately scattered by the sword light. The tip of the sword light chopped towards Hanjin's waist. Two birds with one stone. When the sword light exploded, Hanjin felt that something was wrong. He immediately steadied himself and stepped back. The sword light swept past Hanjin's abdomen, and the sharp wind tore apart Hanjin's robe. Although he had the protection of the spirit possession technique, the dense cold air still left a green mark on Hanjin's abdomen. If Hanjin had the upper hand, of course, he would pursue the victory, and the other party would do the same. The knight was unforgiving. He leaped up and shouted angrily, "I seal!" The dazzling sword light became even brighter. The sword light wrapped in a faint mist and chopped down on Hanjin's head. Hanjin stepped back again, or rather, he was blown away by the turbulent airflow. The faint mist hit the ground like a giant hammer, instantly covering everything in a radius of more than 10 meters with frost. Hanjin frowned. He was pressed for time. He didn't expect to meet a difficult opponent here. The knight didn't attack Hanjin again. Instead, he took a step diagonally and blocked a person behind him. He also stared at Hanjin with vigilance. This was a completely unnecessary action. Hanjin's eyes flickered. He suddenly remembered those thunderbirds who forcibly collided with the meteorites in order to protect their eggs. Hanjin opened his mouth and a green light soared into the sky. It immediately turned into a giant sword more than 20 meters long, engraved with countless strange runes, and chopped down with great force. It had been a long time since Hanjin had last used a powerful spell. This kind of spell might be able to kill an ordinary professional with a single blow, but it would be difficult for it to hit a truly powerful one. Carolyn had taught him an unforgettable lesson. However, that was then, and this is now. The knight was stunned. He immediately burst out with a roar and rushed up to meet the giant sword. The light wave of his fighting spirit was bright to the extreme. He also saw that the power of this blow was extraordinary, so he could only fight with his life. Most of the time, there was a big discrepancy between speculation and reality. Only those who had witnessed it with their own eyes could understand the horror of Hanjin's Taoist magic. Even if Yelena had enough time to set up a magic shield and magic array at will, she wouldn't dare to stand in place and face Han Jin's earth-shattering attack head-on. With a loud bang, the fog released by the night exploded like a fragile balloon. The seemingly solid sword light also turned into glass, and then the knight's long sword was shattered. Finally, the knight fell down like a fly. This time, it was Han Jin who had the upper hand. He swung his hand and released another fire rune, hitting the knight's body. The knight only struggled a little before he became motionless. The child had been watching the show with a smile. Perhaps he thought that his guards could completely protect him. It wasn't until the last knight was knocked down that he reacted. He looked at Han Jin with fear and stepped back step by step. You? What do you want to do? Don't. Don't come over. I'll give you everything. As he spoke, he took out a lot of gadgets. There were gold coins, magic crystals, and even some snacks like jerky. He threw them on the ground carelessly. Han Jin glanced at the child's left hand. Compared with the tender and soft fingers, the space ring that was bigger than a gold coin was particularly eye-catching. However, Han Jin wouldn't go so far as to snatch things from a child. He strode forward and said, I don't want anything. I just want you to sleep for a while. Hearing that Han Jin only wanted him to sleep and didn't want to hurt him, the child stopped retreating. He said to Han Jin blankly, but I can't sleep now. It's okay. Han Jin smiled. I can let you sleep. The child looked at Han Jin, who was getting closer and closer. His head gradually leaned back, and his eyes were full of panic and pleading. Han Jin bent down and slashed the child's neck with his palm. The child's eyes rolled back, and he fell to the ground bit by bit. It was finally quiet. Han Jin let out a sigh of relief and walked slowly to Murphy's body. After a moment of silence, he said to himself, Sorry, I can't help you. Although he did blame himself, if he was given another chance to choose, he still wouldn't help. If Murphy had been promoted to an upper gold dragon, he might have had a chance to turn the situation around. A green dragon against a gold dragon, and he, Han Jin, against a dragon knight? It was useless, not to mention that Murphy was already injured. All his efforts were in vain. Then, Han Jin turned his head and stared at the dragon crystal with a strange look. His comrade sacrificed himself to buy time for everyone, but he came back to look for the dragon crystal. This was a bit unreasonable. However, now was not the time to be picky. Nicholas's flag was flying over St. Petersburg, and Nicholas's mount, the Dragon Knight, had also appeared in St. Petersburg. This meant that what Jed's was most worried about had happened. Among all of Nicholas's strengths, the one that made people fear him the most was his unfathomable strength. In terms of wisdom alone, no one dared to say that they had an absolute advantage. Guevara had won and lost before, and his experience in showing off and suffering was no worse than Nicholas. Jed's, as a vassal, had dealt with Nicholas for many years. Lola in Moonlight City was at a disadvantage, but she could still stop Nicholas's expansion. The two of them were not much worse than Nicholas. However, Nicholas was too strong. Jeds had said that 5 years ago, Nicholas had fought with Archie, who was also a sword saint, and he had only used 2 strikes. The first strike had scattered Archie's sword aura and sent him flying hundreds of meters away. The second strike had shattered Archie's combat aura and body. The fanatical support Nicholas received from the people was inseparable from his strength. What could be more inspiring than seeing enemies that they once thought were invincible fall under Nicholas's sword? Murphy died in battle, and the dragon crystal naturally became a trophy. Instead of letting Nicholas get the dragon crystal, it would be better for him to rob it. This was the cruel truth. However, the size of the dragon crystal was far beyond his expectations. Han Jin sighed and put the dragon crystal into the space ring. Just as he was about to leave, something flowing out of Murphy's body attracted his attention. Murphy's fatal wound was on his neck. The Dragon Knight cultivated the ice combat energy, so the wound was frozen and did not bleed. There were also wounds on Murphy's chest and abdomen, but they were all burnt and did not bleed. However, when a few knights cut open the dragon's head and took out the dragon crystal, the blood flowed out from there. Mofei's body size was very large. Although his heart had stopped beating, his blood was still not cold. The drops of pale golden blood still had traces of heat. Drop by drop, they fell to the ground and eventually formed a string. Han Jin was a little absent-minded. He suddenly recalled that back then, when he desperately exhausted all his energy and was about to die, it was the dragon's blood that saved his life and allowed him to break through the hidden latch in one go. The blood of a young dragon had such powerful energy. What about an adult dragon? However, Murphy was his comrade after all. Although they had only been in contact for a few days, it was undeniable that he had already taken the dragon crystal. Was he still going to absorb the energy in the blood? It was a little shameless. Han Jin's eyes were very conflicted. Leave immediately? Must not waste the energy? In a repeated struggle between the two emotions, the worry and fear that Jed's had revealed finally decided Han Jin's choice. Once the Vatican collapsed, no one would be able to stop Nicholas. The entire continent would belong to Nicholas. Han Jin used his sword and flew above Murphy's head. Perhaps it was because of the desire for power, or perhaps it was because of other reasons, but his lips were trembling. Then, Han Jin bent down and swallowed a mouthful of light golden dragon blood. That was not blood. Instead, it was a ball of burning fire. It was a feeling of extreme comfort. Han Jin only felt that every cell in his body was screaming with joy. He was so excited that he wanted to cry. He wanted to sing, dance, and do many things to vent his emotions. But in the end, his choice was to take a deep breath and bend down again. The unconscious child suddenly opened his eyes quietly and observed Han Jin's movements. On his cheeks, there was a coldness and ferocity that did not match his age, as well as determination. Then, he slowly picked up a long sword and silently walked under the dragon's head. He jumped up and waved the long sword straight at Han Jin's back. No one would have expected that the child was a martial arts genius. A true professional. Han Jin was still immersed in a dreamlike world and did not notice anything. Chapter 256. The sharp blade pierced through Han Jin's chest like a bolt of lightning. A smug and sinister smile appeared on the child's face, but in the next moment, his smile froze. Han Jin's body exploded into countless sand and stones. The child immediately released his combat aura to protect himself and flipped over in the air. After all, he was too young, and his height was even shorter than the sword. His posture of holding the sword looked very strange, but his expression was extremely solemn. His eyelids were half open, and he was completely relying on his senses to identify the movements around him. Han Jin silently emerged from the ground about 10 meters behind the child. His face was very gloomy. In the past, when he was in a critical situation, at least he knew what he was doing and who was hurting him. But this time, until the faked Earth corpse took effect, he didn't realize what was going on, so he immediately hid underground. In other words, he didn't even know how he died. The child's fighting skills had been taught by a famous expert. Although Han Jin didn't make any sound, when Han Jin's gaze fell on his back, he immediately sensed it. He quickly turned around and looked at Han Jin. "Your magic is amazing," the child said with a cheeky smile. "Hey, are you willing to pledge your loyalty to me? I like you." Han Jin answered with his actions. He raised his hand and shot a fire talisman at the child. The child took out a magic scroll and threw it out. Waves of extremely violent magic fluctuations that could almost tear the air apart spread out in all directions. Then, a semicircular light curtain appeared out of thin air and firmly enveloped the child. The fire talisman hit the light screen, and with a boom, it turned into countless bursts of fire. "Have you heard of the absolute barrier?" The child was still smiling. No matter if it's magic or weapons, they can't break the protection of the absolute barrier. Han Jin looked at the child quietly. He had a very strange feeling. What kind of person could teach a child to be like this? You know Archbishop Jedis, right? It took him 4 whole months to craft an absolute barrier magic scroll for me. The child stretched lazily. They should have sensed the magic waves by now. "Hey, I'll ask you again. Are you willing to pledge your loyalty to me?" Don't worry, I don't mind what happened just now. You don't mind, but I mind very much. The person who was killed was me, Han Jin said coldly. The kid's scheming was chilling. To be able to possess a magic scroll of absolute barrier, his family background must be extraordinary. However, Han Jin did not mention his parents or his own background. He only mentioned Jedis because of Jedi's style of doing things. In modern terms, he was a believer in good karma. Countless people owed him a favor. If Han Jin wanted to ease the tension as much as possible, Jedis was without a doubt the best candidate. You're not dead, aren't you? Also, you kill my men. The child carefully observed Han Jin. Seeing the murderous intent in Han Jin's eyes, he shrugged. Forget it. I'm not going to talk nonsense with you. Come on. After saying that, he reached out his left hand and beckoned at Han Jin. His face was full of provocation. Even if it was an adult, there were few who could act so arrogantly. Han Jin coldly snorted, and his figure suddenly disappeared. Then he actually emerged from the god's barrier and grabbed the small hand that was still hooking it. The divine barrier was a light-type defensive forbidden spell. Of course, this type of defensive magic had its own flaws. That day, Jedis had also cast an absolute barrier to protect himself, but it still couldn't escape Nicholas's evil hands. However, it was the first time that it had been broken so easily. Han Jin was extremely annoyed, and a strong murderous intent rose in his heart. However, after he succeeded, he hesitated in front of the small body. The child was shocked, but he reacted quickly. With a wave of his right hand, another magic scroll appeared in his hand. Seeing the kid's endless supply of magic scrolls, Han Jin finally decided to kill him. He clenched his fist and forcefully ripped off the kid's space ring. Blood immediately splattered from the kid's index finger. At the same time, Han Jin opened his mouth, and a green light shot out from the top of the kid's head. However, the child's magic scroll had already been released. The green light passed through the dazzling white light and pierced deep into the ground. Han Jin's eyes flickered. After a while, he sighed softly. He suddenly realized that he was not a person who could achieve great things. When it was time to be ruthless, he would always miss the opportunity for one reason or another. No one could be blamed for this. Han Jin was born in an ordinary family. In that era of peace, parents wanted to see their children grow up happily and healthily. No one would teach their children to be heroes or ambitious people in the future. Before he met his master, he was an ordinary student. He had the emotions of an ordinary person, the cunning of an ordinary person, and the fear of an ordinary person. Although he had learned some things after stepping into the door of cultivation, it was still too limited. In fact, the things that Han Jin had learned in the past 2 years were far more than the sum of the previous 20 years. However, compared to a person's lifetime, 2 years was not long. Han Jin still had a lot to learn and comprehend. After all, he had chosen a path that was not easy to walk down. If Guevara was here, he would have dealt with everything neatly and not given anyone a chance to take advantage of him. Han Jin released Earthmeld again and left the absolute barrier. He then put away his flying sword and took out the soul-devouring orb. With a shake of his hand, Harley's figure appeared in the air. "Ha! Master, you finally remembered me," Harley shouted excitedly. Han Jin was not in the mood. He ignored Harley and walked up to him. He pinched his finger and flung it into the air. Harley's body flew up like a roll of gauze. Following that, Han Jin quickly formed a spell. One talisman after another hit Harley's body, shattering him into pieces. As the spirit of the soul-devouring orb, Harley could clearly sense Han Jin's thoughts. He did not panic and just endured silently. After a while, Han Jin released hundreds of spells. His head was already covered in sweat. The origin energy in his body was depleting at an extremely fast speed. However, he had no other choice. After another few hundred spells, Harley's body was blasted into pieces. Han Jin's eyes narrowed, and he shouted, "Open!" Wisps of black fog flowing in the air suddenly changed. Some turned into stones, some into soil, some into trees, and some into grass. They completely covered the green dragon and the corpses of the night. In the end, Even the surrounding fallen trees and warhorses were tightly wrapped. What Hanjin released was the mountain ceiling formation. The mountain ceiling formation was an illusion formation. Some cultivation sects used this kind of illusion formation to seal their mountain gates to prevent them from being disturbed by the mortal world. However, everything in the illusion formation was real. If you grabbed a handful of soil, it was indeed soil. If you pulled out a blade of grass, it was indeed grass. Compared to this, the Nine Palaces illusion formation that Hanjin released a while ago was just a child's trick. Of course, the mountain ceiling formation was a large-scale formation. Even if there were dozens of Hanjin combined, they would not be able to set it up, let alone a single person. However, Hanjin only wanted to cover the corpses of the green dragon and the knight. He even used Harley's Inchi and consumed a large amount of origin energy to barely succeed. Unless it's absolutely necessary, don't disturb me, Hanjin said softly. At this moment, Harley cannot speak. He could only use his mind to respond. Hanjin disappeared into the small hill. Not long after, a team of knights galloped over. When they passed by this place, they did not hesitate for a moment and rushed past the small hill. No one would run into a small hill on their own. In fact, even if they did, they would not be able to discover anything unusual. After a while, several teams of knights rushed past the small hill. However, the team of knights that rushed over first circled back. The place where Murphy first fell was about 7 to 8 miles away from here. Hanjin could not cover the traces left behind there. The knights at least found a reference point. In the end, the graceful and vigorous golden dragon also appeared in the sky and kept circling. However, the shape of the forest was almost the same everywhere. Even the Dragon Knight could not identify the exact location of the enemy's fall. As time went by, more and more soldiers appeared in the forest. The space scroll used to save lives must have the space coordinates set to the safest place. The child chased out of St. Petersburg, but it did not mean that he would return to St. Petersburg. Within a radius of more than 10 miles, there were people everywhere. Everyone had a nervous and anxious look on their faces. The Dragon Knight was no exception. People tried their best to find any suspicious traces. Grass, treetops, anywhere. During this period, there were people who ran to the small hill from time to time and looked around. Unfortunately, the mystery of Taoism was far beyond what people in this world could guess. The only effect it had was to keep Harley in a constant state of panic. He almost had a heart attack. If only he had a heart, some soldiers suddenly had an idea. They said that if they could identify the traces of the horse's hooves, they would be able to find their young master. However, as soon as they said that, they were scolded by their commanding officer. Countless knights were running around in the forest. There were horses' hooves everywhere. How could they identify them? At dusk, people finally reached a consensus. They believed that the young master was not here. He must have been kidnapped by the enemy. Teams of knights scattered in all directions. Every knight had been warned that if they could not find the young master, there was no need for them to come back. The forest finally returned to its peaceful state. The moon set and the sun rose. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Hanjin walked out of the small hill. He looked around for a moment and stretched out his hand. The sand, soil, and grass on the small hill instantly turned into a black mist and gathered together to form Harley's body. Harley had been holding it in for a few days. Now, he could not hold it in anymore. He was eager to tell Hanjin about the thrilling experience. However, just as he was about to open his mouth, he suddenly froze. This was because he discovered that when Hanjin opened and closed his eyes, there was a faint golden light flashing. However, when he looked carefully, he could not see anything. Chapter 257. Everything was in chaos. The Light Knight Regiment stationed in St. Petersburg was nominally there to cut off the war zone, but in reality, they were there to protect Moonlight City. Many people knew that Lola's power was far inferior to Nicholas. The Light Knight Regiment's betrayal had dealt a fatal blow to Lola. Although she had noticed that Nicholas's troop movements were frequent, she had underestimated Nicholas's decisiveness. Either he didn't do anything, or he pretended to be deaf and dumb. Once he did something, he would go all out without holding anything back. This was Nicholas's style. With the Light Knight Regiment as the vanguard, the army of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light spread out like a fan and attacked several big cities in one go. Nicholas's appetite was indeed big, but from another perspective, it could be seen that he had endured for too long and too deeply in the past. The cities that were under attack were desperately resisting the invasion of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light because they knew that if they lost or surrendered, what awaited them would be death. In the Kingdom of Grand Light, every city that was conquered by war, Nicholas would massacre the local upper-class people. If I extended an olive branch and you rejected it, it would be too late for you to surrender when my army attacked. This was also Nicholas's style. Under normal circumstances, he would only give people one chance. A lord could have all kinds of flaws, but they could never be powerless. Many high-level professionals or talented people were willing to rely on a powerful lord because everyone needed a guarantee in this chaotic world. However, a lord was also a human. If he gave his subordinates a sense of security, who could protect him? Nicholas had many fierce generals under his command. The 4 Dragon Knight Regiment was just a friendly gesture from the Dragon Realm. He also had many other high-level professionals around him. If these people were released, they would definitely be qualified to dominate a region. However, they chose to rely on Nicholas. On one hand, it was because the forces on the continent were almost saturated. It was not easy to destroy a huge class with vested interests from scratch. On the other hand, they also needed a guarantee. Nicholas's unfathomable strength was an irresistible guiding light in this chaotic world. This was a war that could not be learned. No one could bring out such a strong force like Nicholas. Even the Holy See paled in comparison. Louise and Pan were still on their way. They had already returned to Moonlight City, but as soon as they saw Laura, they were chased out by her. Laura told them to seek help from the Vatican. However, Nicholas's strategy was to break through the flanks and outflank the center. The allies of Bright Moon City had either died in battle or fled for their lives. The road to the Vatican had long been cut off, and in just 10 days after Nicholas's attack, the situation had reached an irreversible level. Panwin knew that asking the Holy See for help was just an excuse. Laura wanted her sister to leave this place. Lola's eyes lit up at first, but they soon dimmed. Send the news to the Light Knight Regiment? No one would believe her. They would only think that she was talking nonsense. Panwin had secretly talked to Lola. The guest from afar should have Jed's keepsake. Lola sighed and was not interested in it. There were rumors everywhere that she, Lola, had set up an ambush to kill Jed's and severely injure Nicholas. After that, Nicholas saw that the situation was bad and used a space scroll to escape. Jed's corpse was left there. What kind of keepsake could not be found? At this time, the keepsake was useless. If the guests from afar had come to Moonlight City before the war broke out, they would have met the general of the Light Knight Regiment and had a chance to solve Nicholas's plot. But now it was too late. In the Light Knight Regiment, the voice of revenge for Jed's had become the mainstream. The preconceived judgment was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The entire army was furious. It was impossible to even get in touch or communicate, let alone change anything. After leaving Moonlight City, Blanche parted ways with them. Although Lola and Louise were her good friends, she was more concerned about the safety of her people. Blanche could see how bad the current situation was. Moonlight City had collapsed, and in politics, Nicholas no longer had any opponents. Even if the Vatican had the power, they couldn't jump out and fight against Nicholas. Other than Lola, there was no one in the southwest region that was worth supporting. When Nicholas took over the entire southwest, the elf village would have to move. Everything else was fine, but Nicholas could not get the moon well. Along the way, Han Jin's horizons had been broadened. This was the first time he had seen a large-scale war with his own eyes. At first, he had been flying around in the sky so that he could see the whole picture of Nicholas's army. But later, he became annoyed. Nicholas's army was very well-rounded. He was often intercepted by mages and archers. Once, he was even attacked by a demon annihilation crossbow. Fortunately, The army was marching and did not have a shielding array. Han Jin saw the demon annihilation crossbow from afar. He was extra careful and barely avoided the arrow that was sure to hit him. After all, the speed of using Earth Meld was not as fast as using a sword. After hiding during the day and traveling at night for 3 days, Han Jin finally sensed that Louise was less than 10 miles away from him. The magic of Taoism was indescribable. When he came, he had planted a talisman on Yelena. Even though they were so far away, he could still sense Yelena's position. Finding Louise was a piece of cake. Han Jin vaguely understood that the goal of this trip was probably a failure. But he had to finish what he started. After finding Louise, he would ask her clearly and then decide what to do next. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. Han Jin had just jumped out of the ground when he suddenly heard faint shouts. Knowing that something was wrong, he hurriedly leaped onto his sword and flew forward. On a wide official road, hundreds of people were fighting together. Louise and the others were trapped in the middle. Han Jin had already seen the fighting style of the wildcat. Even though she was surrounded, Louise was still as fierce as before. In this kind of chaotic battle, a dagger was a very weak weapon. But Louise could easily get close to her opponents. Every time she swung her dagger, an enemy would fall in front of her. Beside Louise were 4 warriors. They were much stronger than the guards he had seen before. Moreover, they practiced 4 different fighting techniques. Sometimes, flames would soar into the sky. Sometimes, silver snakes would surge. And sometimes, cold air would fill the air. They slaughtered their enemies as easily as crushing dry weeds. Compared to Louise's men, the enemy's strength was nothing to write home about. Logically speaking, with Louise's fighting ability, they should have been able to break out of the encirclement easily. However, the problem lay with Pan Ven. Han Jin's eyesight was much sharper than before. Although he was still far away, he could clearly see that there was an arrow stuck in Pan Ven's back. Pan Ven was staggering as he walked. And if it weren't for the 2 soldiers beside him supporting him, he would have already fallen down. Outside the encirclement, a dozen or so knights stopped on high ground. They were observing the battle inside while shouting loudly, commanding the soldiers to surround and attack. Suddenly, they saw a dazzling green light shoot down from the sky. They all turned around, their faces full of shock and uncertainty. Louise obviously knew who had come. She became more alert, and her attacks became more vicious. The knights didn't know whether the newcomer was friend or foe. They didn't dare to attack recklessly, but they also didn't dare to come up to greet or ask for information. However, Louise's reinforcements had arrived. The enemy had reinforcements as well. 2 magicians flew over from afar. When they saw Han Jin, one immediately buffed himself with a magic barrier, while the other buffed himself with a shield of air. In the southwest region, no one knew Han Jin's background. When they saw Han Jin floating in the air with the help of a strange magic tool, they instinctively thought that Han Jin was a magician. Both the magic barrier and the shield of air were focused on magic defense. In addition to the 2 magicians, another group of about 100 knights rushed over from afar. Han Jin glanced at the knights, then turned his gaze to the 2 magicians. Louise and the others could temporarily resist the besieging of the soldiers. But if the 2 magicians were to join the battle, the consequences would be unpredictable. "Sir, may I ask?" The magician on the left spoke. "They are your enemies?" Han Jin smiled and pointed in Louise's direction. "Yes, they are also my enemies," Han Jin said softly. He thought of the child again. The child had left a deep impression on him. Although the child was a true professional, his age was limited and his strength was even more limited. There was a certain gap between him and the weaker Morrisons among his companions. Logically speaking, Morrison should not have been able to hurt Han Jin, but the child who was not as strong as Morrison's had done it. Every time he thought of that sword, Han Jin felt a lingering fear. Such a young child, but he was so cunning and ruthless. Knowing that Han Jin would not hurt him, he simply gave up resisting and pretended to be unconscious, seizing the opportunity to attack. This trip was not in vain. He obtained a dragon crystal, absorbed the power contained in the blood of an adult dragon, and learned something from the child. Han Jin also learned something. The best way to educate someone was to see a living, bloody example. If he had just suffered a loss and forgotten it in the blink of an eye, then Han Jin was really stupid. You are. The magician showed a hesitant expression. Can't you see where I came from? Han Jin smiled. Do you want to do it? Or do you want to leave it to me? Han Jin had flown over from the south, which was the territory of Nicholas and Lola. Han Jin also regarded Louise as an enemy, so his identity was obvious. The two magicians calmed down and looked at each other. One of them hurriedly said, "Sir, leave it to us. This is the gift that our city lord prepared for his majesty." The other magician interrupted. "It's fine as long as they die here today." Han Jin spread his hands and made a gesture of invitation. "Thank you, sir." The two mages laughed together. To judge a person's strength, fighting was not the only way. The other party had a magic item that they had never heard of or seen before, so he must be very strong. He should also be an important minister under Nicholas. Being polite and respectful now would be good for them in the future. Chapter 258. The magician who had cast a barrier around himself began to chant a spell while the other magician stood guard beside him. Han Jin's gaze was fixed on Louise, and he didn't seem to care about the two magicians. When a faint red light appeared in the air, Han Jin suddenly waved his hand. 4 dazzling red lights shot out, forming the word mouth in the air and shooting towards the magician who was in the middle of casting a spell. The other magician let out a cry of surprise and immediately raised his wand. Dozens of wind blades appeared in the air and met Han Jin's 4 flying swords head-on. A series of clashing sounds rang out. Although the magician was protecting his companion, he didn't treat Han Jin as an enemy. The wind blades he hurriedly released were pitifully weak. Although most of them hit their targets, they still couldn't stop Han Jin's sword. The magician who was in the middle of casting a spell was stunned when he heard his companion's cry of surprise. He was about to release his meteor. Should he immediately cancel the spell and suffer the disastrous consequences of the magic backlash? Or should he release the spell first? He didn't know what to choose. The flying swords were very fast. Since he was stunned, he didn't have to waste any more energy to think about it. With a loud bang, the 4 flying swords hit the magic shield almost at the same time. The magic shield flashed and then collapsed. Then, 4 bloody holes as thick as a bowl appeared on the magician's body. Blood splattered everywhere, and the magician fell to the ground like a stone. "You?" The other magician looked furious. He glared hatefully at Han Jin and raised his wand again. Han Jin had already rushed towards the magician with his sword. He closed the distance of a few dozen meters in an instant, but the magician had already disappeared into a ball of white light. Han Jin continued to dash forward and glanced around. Soon, he found that the magician had appeared a few hundred meters away and was chanting something in a low voice. His expression was dignified and strenuous. Obviously, he wanted to release a powerful spell. Han Jin sneered. He raised his hand, and a bolt of lightning fell from the sky and hit the magician. The amount of energy he had absorbed from the dragon's blood a few days ago was far more than what he had absorbed from the dragon whelp. Ever since he had broken through to the profound martial realm, he had been working hard to accumulate energy every day. When he had accepted Jetty's request, his total energy was only a few Xian, not even breaking out of the single digits. Now, he had more than 20 Xian. The increase was huge. In the past, he would use up nearly a third of his energy to cast a powerful spell. Now, he could cast a dozen spells in one go, and even more powerful spells. In fact, it was difficult to judge a cultivator by the professional standards of this continent. If Han Jin fought with all his strength, his attack power would not be much worse than a top-grade professional. The problem was that he did not have the ability to fight for a long time. After a few moves, he could only wait for death. If he focused on fighting a protracted battle and conserving his energy, his weak attacks would not be able to pose any threat to a top-grade professional. It could be said that Han Jin was very strong, but also very weak. Whether he would be the former or the latter depended on whether he could find a suitable fighting style for himself. Of course, the so-called fighting style was not static. He had to adjust to different opponents at any time. At this moment, Han Jin was searching, trying, and thinking. In the past, he would never have used the Thunder Palm. It was the lowest level of spells, and its power was not even as strong as an ordinary fire charm. He wanted to interrupt his opponent's spell casting and force his opponent to use instant spells to fight him. The lightning landed on the magician's air shield, and a deafening explosion sounded. The power of the Thunder Palm was almost negligible, and the magician's air shield didn't change at all. However, he was so shocked by the sudden explosion that his eyes rolled back, and he even forgot the spell he was about to chant. Even Louise, who was in the middle of the chaotic battle, couldn't help but glance in the direction of the explosion. Many swindlers, who failed to cultivate and only learned a little bit of magic, had a special liking for the Thunder Palm. It was precisely because the sound of the Thunder Palm was too loud, comparable to the sound of thunder. It was very effective for acting. If one really wanted to use the Thunder Palm to subdue demons and devils, it was useless. However, if it was used to scare people, the Thunder Palm was a first-class Taoist magic. The mage was also frightened. His incantation had been interrupted, so he had to bear the consequences of the magic backlash. His face had already turned pale, but his first reaction was to check if there was any problem with his shield of air. Obviously, even he himself did not believe that the shield of air could withstand such a powerful spell. Han Jin flew down diagonally on his sword, and the distance between the two of them was shrinking rapidly. Seeing that his air shield was fine, the magician was still a little worried. He added a magic shield to himself, then raised his magic staff and began chanting again. Although the magic backlash had severely injured his body, he had no other choice. He could only think about it after defeating his opponent. Han Jin waved his hand, and 3 bolts of lightning fell from the sky and hit the magician's air shield. The thunderous sound rolled wildly between heaven and earth. The magician was shaken and staggered a few steps back, and his chanting was interrupted again. The magician was unlucky. The first time, it was because he was unprepared. Although he was prepared for the second time, his weakened mental strength was not enough to withstand the explosion that made his blood boil. 2 consecutive spells backfired on him, and he was now a cripple. Han Jin waved his hand, and 4 flying swords emitting red light shot down diagonally. As if there were a few invisible people controlling them, the 4 flying swords kept hitting the air shield. Then, Han Jin jumped up, and the green light under his feet shot forward. The air shield and the magic shield were destroyed in an instant, and the magician's body was also cut in 2. The green light then circled around and supported Han Jin's body, shooting him toward the official road. The team of about 100 knights saw this scene from afar. They sped up and continued to rush forward. Han Jin landed quietly on the official road. Looking at his posture, it seemed that he wanted to rely on his own strength to forcibly stop the knights. The knights were getting faster and faster. No one knew if they were afraid or panicked. However, when fighting with a mage, as long as they could get close to the mage, they would have already won half the battle. This was common sense that every warrior was clear about. Behind Han Jin, half of the knights who were commanding the soldiers also split up and tried to attack Han Jin from the front and back. On the boundless plain, the knights sprinted with all their might. Although there were not many of them, they still gave people the feeling that they could not be stopped by 10,000 men. In comparison, Han Jin's figure seemed very weak, lonely, and even pitiful. Closer, closer, 100 meters, 50 meters. Han Jin could clearly see the slightly trembling cheeks of the knights. The knights were attacking a person from the front and back, and they were still sprinting with all their might. This was more or less a farce. When they collided with each other, whether they could kill the enemy or not was another matter. They would definitely hurt their own people. However, Han Jin had easily killed 2 magicians, and the threat he posed was too great. They were not in the mood to think about the details and only wanted to get rid of the enemy as soon as possible. Han Jin waved his hand, and several flying swords floating in the air fell back into his hand. Only one flying sword was still breathing red light, quietly staying there. If there were any knights who were familiar with Han Jin, they would definitely turn around and run as far as they could when they saw this scene. The unknown was the most terrifying. This was not just a saying, but a fact. As the saying goes, one can know the autumn by seeing a leaf. The division of professions on the continent had long been formed. Han Jin knew the specialties of all professions, such as swordsman, knight, magician, archer, and so on. He also knew what they relied on to fight. Whether in the southwest or the northeast, the specialties of professions would not change much. However, no one here knew Han Jin. Seeing that Han Jin still did not move, the knights showed a look of excitement. The ones in the front all raised their spears, and the ones at the back took off their longbows. This was to prevent Han Jin from escaping through the air. They had thought very carefully about how to defeat the enemy, but they had forgotten to consider that how could a real magician not be afraid of the impact of a large number of knights? Just when the shining tip of the spear had broken through the distance of 30 meters, Han Jin suddenly recited, "A stone stirs up 1,000 waves." A stream of white light soared into the sky and collided with the flying sword in the air. Amidst a loud boom, countless seemingly material sword shadows sliced the sky into pieces, then they covered the space of several hundred meters. In the ubiquitous shadows of swords, in an instant, everything changed dramatically at the same time. The armor and bodies of the knights were cut, and the vigorous war horses were cut into pieces. Countless deep pits and ditches were blasted out of the turf that was full of vitality. Bright red blood, green grass, and flesh of various colors were flying all over the sky, as if there was a snowstorm. However, this was the kind of snow that would only appear in hell. Looking from the sky, the charging formation formed by the knights collapsed at the same time and turned into pieces of flesh on the ground. However, there was an exception. A knight in bright silver heavy armor was actually still alive, but his heavy armor was broken beyond recognition. He roared in grief and indignation while rushing towards Han Jin. The few knights who stayed in the same place were stunned, and then immediately shouted and scattered, no longer caring about commanding the battle. They knew that their commander was still alive, but they also knew that a person who could release powerful magic in an instant was at least a top-grade professional. What was more, the mysterious magician released a kind of magic that they had never heard of before. It was extremely terrifying and bloody. Who knew what else the magician had mastered? Seeing that the knight continued to rush towards him, Han Jin raised his hand and wanted to release the green glow. However, he hesitated and took out a long whip. With a gentle shake, the tip of the whip rolled towards the knight's ankle like a snake. Han Jin first killed 2 magicians easily, and then killed hundreds of knights with a single spell. No one dared to be careless in the face of such an opponent. The knight felt that there must be something strange about the whip. He suddenly roared and jumped up. The tip of his spear emitted a light that was several meters long, and he pointed it at Han Jin's forehead. Han Jin's figure retreated quickly. The green glow suddenly turned into a huge sword that was more than 20 meters long and slashed down with great force. In the dazzling light, a faint smile appeared on Han Jin's face. He had vaguely understood something. The art of martial arts was not necessarily about breaking through the limit of speed, nor was it necessary to have the power to destroy everything. Control and rhythm were equally important. Chapter 259. The knight was in midair and had no way to borrow strength. The only thing he could do was to gather all his fighting energy and resist this blow. With a loud bang, the knight was swatted down like a fly and landed heavily on the ground. Dust flew everywhere, and more than half of his body was embedded in the ground. Previously, he had resisted the impact of the 1,000 waves, and now he was hit hard. The knight was seriously injured, and the fighting energy on his body was very dim. Moreover, he had not yet woken up from the violent impact. His lifeless eyes stared blankly at the sky. Of course, Hanjin would not give the knight time to breathe. He jumped up and punched the knight's chest. The thin fighting energy could no longer protect him. When the knight opened his mouth and roared in pain, Hanjin threw a fire talisman into the knight's mouth. The knight's roar suddenly became hoarse. He dug his mouth with his hand, but his hand was also burned. He changed to the other hand, but it was still the same. In the end, the knight desperately rolled a few times and stopped moving. Hanjin turned around and strode toward the battle. The soldiers outside had already realized that something was wrong. They turned around and scrambled to escape. However, the soldiers inside were in a killing frenzy. They did not feel anything and kept shouting about rewards, capture alive, and so on. If he did not release Taoist magic, it would be difficult for Hanjin to pose a threat to the high-grade professions with only the art of spirit possession. In fact, he would bless himself with the art of spirit possession in every battle, not to kill the opponent, but to improve his reaction speed and resistance. However, the soldiers could not compare to the high-grade professions. To put it bluntly, they were cannon fodder. The white iron armor was no different from tofu under Hanjin's fists. Every time Hanjin punched, he could smash a soldier's armor and body out of shape. In just a moment, Hanjin forced his way into the encirclement. Behind him, there were at least 30 soldiers lying in pools of blood. Only now did the soldiers realize that something was wrong. When they looked back, they saw that the generals had already escaped. In the distance, there were countless knight corpses lying on the ground. Panic quickly spread. Promotion and wealth were only dreams and wishes. Without life, dreams and wishes, no matter how beautiful they were just bubbles. No one knew which soldier took the lead to escape, but the rest of the people scattered. Although Louise and the others still maintained their strong fighting strength, no one chased after the soldiers. Whether they were injured or not, it had nothing to do with the weapon. The key was the person holding the weapon. The guards beside Louise looked at Hanjin with shock and excitement. They had been fighting with ease, and if it weren't for the fact that they had to protect the unconscious Panvin, they would have already killed their way out. Therefore, they knew exactly what was happening on the other side of the battlefield, and the sudden appearance of a powerful friend was something to be very happy about. Louise was incomparably fierce in battle, but after seeing Hanjin, her reaction changed drastically. Her eyes reddened. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Louise grew up in a spoiled environment and developed a spoiled temper. Everyone gave in to her and was afraid of her. As a result, she almost had no friends. Of course, this referred to true friends. Other than her sister, her closest friends were Panvin and Blanche. Now that one had left her and the other was unconscious, she was extremely sad. Because of this, she almost wanted to complain to Hanjin, but in the end, she controlled herself. Hanjin nodded to Louise, then walked to the unconscious Panvin. He carefully looked at the arrow feather on his back and felt Panvin's pulse. He raised his hand and released a talisman on Panvin's body. Then, Hanjin formed a hand seal. His fingertip touched the arrow feather lightly. The arrow feather suddenly became soft. Then, Hanjin directly pulled it out. On Panvin's back, there was a thumb-sized wound. When the arrow was still in Panvin's body, not much blood flowed out. His muscles were elastic enough to catch the arrow, but when he pulled it out, blood immediately began to spurt out. Hanjin quickly formed a few incantations and injected them into Panvin's body one after another. Suddenly, the blood stopped flowing as if it had been cut off. You're a priest? A guard cried out in surprise. You can say that. Hanjin smiled and looked around. Go make a stretcher. It's not good to hold him up like this. Yes, sir. The guards didn't hesitate to wait for Louise's order. They turned and rushed into the forest. They now had enough vision to observe the battlefield on the other side, and the mess they saw made them sigh. He's fine? Louise's eyes lit up. He's fine. He'll be able to walk after a few days of rest. Hanjin said softly. In the Taoist canon's looting, liujia technique, the looting taught how to save and cure people, while the liujia taught how to kill and cure people. The more skilled Han Jin was at killing people, the more skilled he was at saving people. Because his foundation was origin energy, Pan Vin's injury wasn't a problem for him at all. It's good that he's fine. Louise let out a long sigh. Han Jin's gaze fell on the guards. You've already returned to Moonlight City? Yes. Louise nodded. Then why did you come out? My sister told me to ask for help from the Vatican. Louise's face revealed a pained expression. Clearly, she didn't want to leave Moonlight City at that time, but under her sister's abuse of power, she could only obey. The Vatican? Han Jin frowned. Jed's only told him to look for the generals of the Radiant Knights, not the Pope. With Jed's intelligence, he shouldn't have made such a mistake. Unless Jed's thought that if the Radiant Knights really fell into a trap, the Pope's ability to adapt would definitely not be able to keep up with Nicholas's plan. In other words, the Pope was already a dead man. War has already broken out in Moonlight City. Do you know who Nicholas's vanguard is? Louise whispered. It's the Radiant Knights. I know. Han Jin sighed softly. This was truly a tragedy. He knew that Nicholas was just using the Radiant Knights to make them and Moonlight City suffer. Then, Nicholas would jump out to clean up the mess. He would occupy Moonlight City and wipe out the Radiant Knights. He would get rid of his old enemy effortlessly and also destroy the biggest obstacle on his path to hegemony, the Vatican. The problem was that it was useless for him to know. Was he supposed to go to Moonlight City and persuade the Radiant Knights? You've been fooled. Nicholas is the murderer of Jed's. Who would believe that? Jed's had said that in addition to his unfathomable strength, Nicholas also had a very terrifying trait. He was good at enduring. Before this, Nicholas had always maintained a close relationship with the Vatican. About 10 years ago, he had a child, a boy, and then he personally went to the Vatican to ask the Pope to baptize his child. Every time a war ended, he would kneel in front of the statue of the God of Light and ask the God of Light to forgive his sins. However, asking for forgiveness did not stop him from starting another war. Although this was a shameless attitude that could not be repented, his kneeling had moved many people. When he established a country, the first country to be established since the era of chaos, he personally knelt in front of the Pope and asked the Pope to put the crown on his head. At that time, many people attended the coronation ceremony. The Pope was very satisfied with the grandeur of the ceremony. A king, kneeling in front of him, this was a great honor. The Vatican, which was in the era of chaos, had not enjoyed this kind of glory for a long time. In Jed's words, Nicholas and the Vatican had been in a honeymoon period for more than 10 years. Who would believe that Nicholas was the murderer? Not to mention others, even Jed's, who had been killed by Nicholas, did not believe that Nicholas would suddenly attack him. This feeling was absurd and helpless. A car was about to drive over a cliff, but the people in the car, including the driver, were all in a state of madness. They knocked on the window and smashed the door, but no one cared. If you blocked the front of the car would be the first to run you over. In the end, you could only stand there and watch. Sigh. Han Jin sighed again. It's useless. Didn't I tell you? The Vatican lost the divine crown a long time ago. Didn't you tell your sister? I told her. Then why did she ask you to go to the Vatican? Han Jin was very confused. Pan Vin told me that we can't lose our last bit of courage. Louise bit her lip. Huh? Han Jin still did not understand. You don't understand, Louise said in a desolate tone. Pan Vin said that Light Moon City is not afraid of the Light Knight Regiment, but it is most afraid of the Light Knight Regiment. Looking at Han Jin's confused eyes, Louise explained softly, Light Moon City can block the attack of the Light Knight Regiment, but the Light Knight Regiment is the symbol of the Vatican. Their participation in the battle has a huge impact on our warriors. If the Vatican really stands on Nicholas' side, there's only one outcome for Light Moon City: complete destruction. So, Han Jin continued while thinking. Your sister wants to restore the low morale? That's why she asked you to ask for help from the Vatican. This proves that you and the Vatican have not fallen out. Otherwise, your sister would not send you to the tiger's den. At least we'll bring hope to our warriors." Louise couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. Han Jin smiled bitterly. He had already revealed the secret to Louise. When Louise saw the real Lola, she would definitely tell him everything. Lola immediately realized the serious consequences and immediately asked Louise to ask for help from the Holy See. Han Jin, on the other hand, only understood the problem after Louise's reminder. In terms of quick-wittedness, Han Jin was no match for Lola. Then, what about Nikolai, who was firmly above Lola's head? Work hard. He had to work hard to learn and cultivate. Not only did he have to cultivate, but he also had to use his brain and strategy. He could only become the leader of that small team because he picked the bigger one out of the smaller ones. Sasu was just a bard. Although he had seen a lot, it did not mean that he knew a lot. The truth was often buried under one scam after another. If he did not participate, he would not have the opportunity to understand. Morrison's was even worse. He was a warrior with some smarts. He could fight with his life, but to use his brain, forget it. Sunir had once participated in a legendary war, but her role was only that of a warrior. It could be said that she was used to bloodshed, but it could not be said that she saw through people's hearts and understood human nature. On the contrary, she still retained a part of her naivety. Furthermore, others could be naive and childish, but could he? An impulse had cost Edwina's life, and a soft-hearted heart had almost caused him to be killed by a child. Failure was the mother of success. This saying was true, but it was too hypocritical. How many times could a person learn from failure? Sometimes, one failure was enough. It was enough to consign someone to eternal damnation. Chapter 260. No matter how the leaders viewed war, to the common people, war meant displacement, disaster, and even death. Nicholas was good at politics, but when war was going on, no one would waste their energy to care about the lives of the common people. Moreover, Nicholas's military discipline was definitely not strict. How could he make the country's people love war? It was very simple: profit and glory. The victorious side usually had the unquestionable right to plunder and trample. The so-called morality and righteousness seemed very weak at this time. A general who had beheaded more than a dozen people would become a hero in the eyes of his own people. But in the eyes of his enemies, he was a devil. The colors of black and white were particularly monotonous. In fact, this was a dispute that had never ended since ancient times. Everyone said that they were white and accused the other party of being black. As for the truth, it was very difficult to tell. Nicholas implemented a citizenship system. The citizens of the country had the same rights as the nobles and were exempt from all taxes. The lowest rank was the slave. No matter if it was a noble or a lowly slave, they could change their fate. As long as they could obtain military merits, slaves could become commoners. Commoners could become citizens, and citizens could be promoted to nobles. This gave people hope that they could not refuse. Perhaps it was because people were more happy than sad, but the citizens of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light could only see who had become a citizen and who had been promoted to nobles, but they could not see the white bones. Throughout the country, many people longed for war. Nikolai had a huge advantage. He was an invader, and he could completely overthrow the old vested interests. Others couldn't do it. They needed the power of the entire vested interests to maintain their rule. If they wanted to learn from Nikolai, Nikolai would be killed before his army arrived. In the past few days, Han Jin had been protecting Louise. Of course, this protection was mostly psychological. Louise herself was not weak, but because she had suddenly left the only person she could rely on, it was inevitable that she would panic. Han Jin's appearance gave her a lot of comfort. She vaguely understood why Archbishop Jed's had entrusted this person in front of her. The magic that he had never heard of or seen before was sharp and ruthless. The reason why Jed's placed his hopes on him was definitely related to his strength. Louise really wanted to talk to Han Jin and hoped that Han Jin would volunteer to go to Moonlight City to help her sister. However, seeing that Han Jin did not mention Moonlight City, she gave up on this unrealistic idea. After all, he was a messenger and had no obligation to shed blood for Moonlight City. From time to time, they saw groups of refugees on the road. When human nature was out of control, it was always vividly displayed. Some were timid and submissive. Some would not attack unless they were attacked. Some would steal and rob everywhere. There were even some strong farmer who had formed a bandit group. When they saw this kind of thing, Louise and the others would sometimes intervene, but most of the time, they just ignored it. They could not do anything even if they wanted to, and it would only drag down their journey. Panvin had already regained his consciousness. The day before yesterday, they had wanted to ask for the help of a city lord, but in the end, the city lord had led a group of people to greet them warmly outside the city. But in the blink of an eye, he had killed them. Louise and the others had relied on their agile reactions to survive, but Panvin was the unluckiest one. This was normal. If the reaction speed of a mage was not inferior to that of a warrior, then warriors would have long been extinct on the continent. Hanjin could not wait any longer. He was eager to go back. After seeing how powerful and influential Nicholas was, no one could remain indifferent. At night, Hanjin, Louise, and Panvin had a long talk until the sky was bright. His main idea was very clear. If things did not work out, he hoped that Louise and Panvin would go to the Bite Man. When Nicholas revealed his true intentions and turned to the Knights of Light, he also hoped that Louise and the others would tell all the priests and believers that Archbishop Jedis was waiting for them in the Bite Man. The reason why he did not mention Black Raven City was because the name was too unpleasant to hear. Furthermore, he had confidence in Lang Ning. Even if Lang Ning could not do it, Guevara was not just for show. The real enemies were not the four city lords of the Bite Man, but Zagund and Dismark, as well as Cass of Depew City and Chasam of Cold Shadow City. However, only one of the latter two was left. If Chasam wanted to continue south, he would have to conquer Depew City. Of course, Cass would not give up his territory, so these two could only become mortal enemies. As for Zagund and Dismark, they were not so easy to deal with. The Bite Man was too close to the Holy Crown City, and the rise of another force would definitely alert Dismark. On the other hand, Hanjin had conquered Black Raven City, killed Zagund's son, and then killed Zagund's two wives. This was not only a great hatred, but also a great humiliation. Compared to this, the feud between Zagund and Dismark was not so important. After all, Zagund had always been suppressing Dismark, and he had always been the one to take the initiative. Therefore, it was very likely that Zagund would target a new force that was far from being formed. Hanjin also vaguely revealed his identity. He did not know if Louise could understand, but Panvin definitely understood the meaning behind his words. After saying what needed to be said, Hanjin was eager to return home. After saying a few simple words of farewell, he mounted his sword and shot towards Yelena's direction. Hanjin had been gone for nearly 20 days, but Yelena and the others had not been idle. There were more than 100 little Thunderbirds that needed to be taken care of, and Jed's had not recovered yet, so he also needed to be taken care of. After being baptized by Hanjin's mystical magic, the little Thunderbirds were in high spirits. They also had a large appetite and were lively and aggressive. In fact, it was not difficult to hunt for them. Everyone present was a high-level professional, so they could easily go out for a stroll and drag a holy beast back. The problem was that the little Thunderbirds were always fighting with each other, so they had to be watched and stopped in time. Otherwise, some of the little Thunderbirds would definitely be injured or even killed. This was a mysterious law of nature. If there was a Thunderbird king in the group where the little Thunderbirds were born, then the little Thunderbird would be safe and sound. If there were no restrictions, then the little Thunderbirds would fight each other to the death. This was also why Thunderbirds like to live in groups. In a large group, there was bound to be a Thunderbird king. Even if there was a fight, it would not be for the little ones that were just born. The Thunderbirds that were alone were much more miserable. After the little Thunderbirds were born, they would often kill each other until there was only one winner left. This was not conducive to the reproduction of a race. Jed's was also very busy during this period. He had a great ambition, which was to spread the glory of the God of Light to every corner of the world. Yelena respected him very much and did not reject the Vatican. So he focused his attention on a stubborn person, Gibran. No one knew what Gibran had experienced when he was young. His ruthlessness was obvious to all, but he was similar to Winston. If others did not take the initiative to bully and hurt him, he would not have exposed his extreme violent side. In this world where the strong preyed on the weak, it was rare to be able to maintain one's bottom line. Of course, except for his friends, he would not help anyone, nor would he hit someone when they were down. He had always been a bystander. But Jeds believed that this was far from enough. There were too many tragedies in the world, and because of the lack of the spirit of helping each other, if he wanted to completely change the world, everyone had to start with him. In fact, Gibran still had a good impression of Jeds, but he politely refused to accept his teachings. Gibran had experienced too many things, and his views had long been set. It was not something that could be changed with a few words. On this day, Winston, Saxon, and the others were digging a hole. The size of the little Thunderbirds was getting bigger and bigger. The original hole was too small and shallow, and the little Thunderbirds would often jump out of it and run around happily. They could only chase from behind, not daring to use too much strength for fear of hurting the little Thunderbirds. They also could not move too fast for fear of scaring the little Thunderbirds. Although the little Thunderbirds now looked not much different from chicks, they were already showing a fierce aura. With a light peck of their little beaks, they could penetrate the leather of magic beasts. Especially when they were frightened, their attacks were even fiercer. Saxon was at a disadvantage. He was caught off guard and was pecked on the toe by a little Thunderbird. As a result, his combat boots were pierced and his big toe was pecked with a bloody hole. As an elven archer, Julia had excellent eyesight and hearing. She was sitting on the side and laughing as she watched Jeds torture Gibran. Suddenly, she was stunned and jumped up to the top of a tree. She then cried out in surprise, "Raphael! It's Raphael! He's back!" Jeds immediately abandoned Gibran and stood up abruptly to look at the sky. Soon, he saw a dazzling green light shooting from the sky. That's right, there was only one person in the entire continent who could fly in the sky in this way. Jed's eyes were very complicated. His joy was mixed with a bit of panic. Humans were indeed strange creatures. They knew that there was not much hope, but they still wanted to see a miracle. Perhaps this was the fundamental reason why humans needed faith. The green light came closer and closer, then shot diagonally towards the ground. In the next moment, Hanjin's figure appeared from the green light and landed steadily on ground. Looking at Hanjin's expression, Jed's eyes suddenly darkened. When I got there, Nicola had already started. Hanjin explained softly. He didn't want to tell the truth directly, but a lie needed to be covered up and explained with more lies. If he was fooling a child, it wouldn't be a problem, but he couldn't fool Jeds. If he continued to ask, he would definitely give himself away. I knew I couldn't stop Nicola. Jeds smiled reluctantly. You didn't encounter any danger, did you? After hearing bad news, Jeds was still concerned about Hanjin's safety. This made Hanjin feel very relieved. He said slowly, I met a dragon knight, huh? This is also the first time I've seen a real golden dragon. Do you know who he is? Dragon Knight. Yelena couldn't help but cry out. Raphael, tell us in detail what you encountered. Winston and Saxon also came over. They were very interested in the local customs of the other area. Even the little Thunderbirds were chirping crazily, as if they knew that Hanjin had returned. Okay, Hanjin smiled. He had a lot of things to ask, such as the Demon Annihilation crossbow. He had never heard of such a terrifying weapon that could cause irreparable damage to a dragon. In order to not let Louise, Panvin, and the others look down on his strength, he had to come back and ask Jeds. Damn, sorry everyone. I went online to read the book reviews out of habit and found that there was no update today. When I entered the author's section, I found that I had set the time for tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Chapter 261. In a straw hut, Hanjin recounted his experience. Of course, he wouldn't mention the incident with Murphy. In the end, he voiced his doubts. When he was attacking the child, he met a peak 10th grade master. Later, when he was rescuing Louise, he met another peak 10th grade master. In terms of probability, it was too much of a coincidence. It gave people the feeling that there were masters everywhere. He also heard Louise talk about the military structure of Nicholas's army. Nicholas had 4 dragon knights under his command, which were of course supermasters. He also had 6 independent mage legions, each of which was led by a magister or even a grand magister. Nicholas himself was a sword saint, and he had several sword saints under his command. The commanders and vice-commanders of the Light Knight Legion were all saint knights. After careful calculation, the number of masters under Nicholas was too terrifying. He had at least 10 12th grade masters under his command. In his area, 12th grade masters were too rare. Grand Duke Solomon was one, and Duke Solomon's old enemy, Lord Forza, was another. Guevara, who was all-powerful 20 years ago, was another. Chasam of Cold Shadow City was another. There was no one else. As for Zagund and Dismark, no one knew how strong they were now. However, 10 years ago, they definitely hadn't reached 12th grade yet. Guevara had killed his way into Black Raven City alone and killed his way through the city. If Zagund had the strength to fight, how could he have let Guevara be so arrogant? Judging from a map, the southwest region was indeed larger, but this was not the reason why there were so many experts in the southwest region. Furthermore, the level of magical craftsmanship in the southwest region was obviously much higher. The Demon Annihilation crossbow was an example. How many Demon Annihilation crossbows he had seen? Hanjin couldn't figure it out. It was reasonable to say that a harsh environment was better for training people. Wars between lords had been going on for years. Today, they were fighting each other, and tomorrow, they were fighting each other. It was a mess. Even the mercenaries in isolated Cliff City often fought with magical beasts. If they weren't strong enough, they might lose the right to survive. Therefore, every professional was working hard to cultivate. The situation in the southwest region was much quieter. Panvin once said that there were very few wars in the southwest region. For example, after Nicholas inherited the position of the Lord of Iron Fist City, the nearby Doreen City was much more powerful than Iron Fist City. However, the Lord of Doreen City, Lin, did not want to annex the territory of Iron Fist City. He only asked for a marriage alliance with Nicholas. If it were Zagund or Chasam, they would have attacked long ago. The city, which had been baptized by blood for a long time, was lacking in many aspects. It didn't make sense no matter what. Jedis pondered for a long time and asked about Black Raven City, Bite Man City, Holy Crown City, Wild Willow City, and other cities. Then he slowly said, maybe it has something to do with the level of civilization. Civilization? What do you mean? Hanjin asked, stunned. You still don't understand the lives of ordinary civilians. Jedis said softly. If a person can't even fill his stomach, does he have the energy to do anything else? From what you said, I can tell that the people here have a very difficult life. For the civilians, as long as they're not killed by the army and bandits, they can eat their fill and they can reproduce. They have no other pursuits, right? Yelena and the others looked at each other and didn't say anything. How can that be? Jedis sighed. This is inferno. Compared to you, our climate is suitable, and our products and resources are abundant. At least we can feed the majority of the civilians, so they have the time and energy to think about how to change their fate. I understand what you mean. Hanjin said, hunger and cold lead to thievery, and hunger and cold lead to greed. Some things can only be thought and done when the basic conditions of survival are met. Your words are not pleasant to hear, but they are very insightful. Jedis smiled. And have you ever thought about the fact that your population is decreasing as you fight? If the civilians can settle down, then civilization will progress. Do you know how many people there are in Iron Fist City? How many? Saxon asked curiously. More than 3 million. Winston, Gibran, and the others were shocked. A city that could accommodate more than 3 million people was almost 10 times the population of Holy Crown City. Do you know how many magic and martial arts academies there are in Iron Fist City? Jedis asked again. How? How many? This time, Saxon's expression was somewhat unnatural. There are more than 40 magic academies and more than 50 martial arts academies. Of course, there are first-rate, second-rate, and third-rate academies. Jedis paused. But how many of them do you have? No one answered. The City of Elements, controlled by Grand Duke Solomon, and the Holy Crown City, controlled by Dismark, each had a magic academy. Chisholm's Cold Shadow City had 3 magic academies, and Fado City, controlled by Lord Forza, had 2 martial arts academies. The rest of the cities were poor. Our God's Language Magic Academy is different from yours, Yelena argued with a red face. All the students in our academy are elites, elites with noble blood, right? Jedis smiled. If I may ask, how many magisters did your God's Language Magic Academy produce? Are you questioning my power? Yelena said proudly. No, you misunderstand. Jedis hurriedly said, counting from now on, our Magic Academy has nurtured over 100 magisters and grand magisters in the past 30 years. It's just that they all ended up pledging their allegiance to different people. How many magisters has your God's Word, Elite Magic Academy, nurtured? Yelena was tongue-tied and couldn't answer. Jedis continued, there are tens of millions of people in the Kingdom of Magnificent Light. At the end of every year, a large number of teachers from the Magic Academies will walk around looking for qualified students. But the tuition of the Magic Academy is very expensive. Some children can't afford it, but if their qualifications are good enough, the Magic Academy will provide them with an opportunity to study free of charge. But your magic and martial arts academies are only open to the children of nobles, right? He knew his friends very well. Sunir was a descendant of God, and Leger was the only son of the Knight of Conrad. They had the qualifications and conditions to become professionals. Morrison's was completely lucky. His parents died when he was very young, and he was adopted by Sylvia's father. This was also the reason why he both hated and loved Sylvia. He hated that Sylvia's temper was more fiery than his. On one hand, he loved her out of gratitude, and on the other hand, he and Sylvia did have an innocent relationship. Sasua's road to success was even more difficult. He yearned for the life of a bard, and because of this, he met an old and dying wandering magician by chance and learned some magic knowledge. After that, he relied on self-study and a tattered magic book to become a warlock. So, after meeting Yelena, he pestered her all day long and desperately tried to learn all kinds of magic knowledge. This was also why he improved faster than Morrison's and Leger. He had enough qualifications, but he didn't learn magic properly, so it was difficult for him to progress. Gibran, Winston, and the others also had their own opportunities. Otherwise, they might have died long ago, or they might still be facing the earth with their backs facing the sky. A farmer who couldn't control his own fate. Do you really think that there aren't any geniuses and elites among tens of millions of civilians? Jedis smiled. You have a point, Han Jin said. He had always disliked the idea of bloodlines, so of course he would support Jedis. Yelena didn't say anything. Although she had enough qualifications to be arrogant, she wasn't arrogant enough to think that tens of millions of people couldn't compare to her. Moreover, there was a living example in front of her, Han Jin. 2 years ago, Han Jin was still a beggar. What about now? How strong was Han Jin? Don't think that only God's Language Magic Academy is a first-class magic academy. The demon annihilation crossbow that Raphael just mentioned was developed by more than a dozen magic academies in Iron Fist City. However, it wasn't called the demon annihilation crossbow, but the dragon-slaying arrow. The structure of the demon annihilation crossbow. It seems to be designed specifically for dragons. Jedis' smile was a little strange, but I don't think the future of the demon annihilation crossbow is very optimistic. The dragons of the Dragon Realm, Nicholas's strongest ally, were very angry and disgusted with the appearance of the demon annihilation crossbow. Although Nicholas repeatedly emphasized that the demon annihilation crossbow was used to deal with the dragons controlled by Lola, in the end he was forced to destroy the design of the demon annihilation crossbow under pressure. He even sent his most trusted assistant, the main designer of the demon annihilation crossbow, Grand Magus Englin, to the Dragon Realm to let him be judged by the dragons in exchange for the forgiveness of the Dragon Realm. Lola also has dragons. Han Jin asked. The Dragon Realm supports Nicholas, and Dragon City has always been hostile to the Dragon Realm. Of course, they would support Lola. This isn't a secret, don't you know? Jedis asked. I don't know. No one told me. At that time, Nicholas had already made more than 200 demon annihilation crossbows. Haha. The manufacturing ability of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light is very amazing. The Dragon Realm was not satisfied with Nicholas's concession and asked Nicholas to destroy all the demon annihilation crossbows. They also threatened Nicholas with the betrayal of 4 Dragon Knights. But, in the end, I don't know what conditions Nicholas promised, but the Dragon Realm suddenly reconciled with Nicholas. Nicholas also has times when he is threatened? Han Jin laughed. He suddenly realized a problem and remembered what Guevara had said before. Can the Dragon Realm affect those Dragon Knights? Of course. I don't understand. Are they Dragon Knights or Night Dragons? Han Jin asked. Whoever is stronger is in charge. There are countless dragons in the Dragon Realm and Dragon City. How many Dragon Knights do you think there are in the entire continent? Jedis laughed. Comrades? People only see the glory of the Dragon Knight, but they don't see, haha. Looking at you, it seems you don't have a good impression of those dragons. Is that strange? The dragons are powerful and look down on any race on the continent. They have even repeatedly challenged the authority of the great god of light. Why should I like them? Jedis said lightly. Chapter 262. Over the past few days, Han Jin, Jeds, and the others often discussed the local customs of the 2 regions. Under Jeds' tireless introduction, Han Jin and the others learned a lot about the Kingdom of Magnificent Light. The most popular topic was the comparison between the advantages and disadvantages of the 2 regions. The customs of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light were relatively simple. In fact, no matter which space or what type of society it was, most of the surplus value was created by the civilians and slaves. Those at the top of the pyramid were often those who never created any value. They did not work but had good food, and they did not weave but had fine clothes. This was a strange phenomenon in human society. Although Nicholas had implemented a citizenship system, and all the magic and martial art academies had opened their doors to the civilians, this only eased social conflicts and did not fundamentally improve the status of the civilians. What Nicholas did was to give the civilians a way out, a chance. Do you want to not be bullied? Do you want to be protected by the state? Sure, go and do your best to contribute to the country. If you want to resist, then it's your fault. You can't become a citizen because you don't have the ability. Who else can you blame? You deserve to be bullied. It was impossible to eliminate classes. There were smart people, and there were stupid people. There were strong people, and there were weak people. There were lucky people, and there were often unlucky people. Even if the original classes could be eliminated and everyone stood on the same starting line, a new class would quietly be created. Jeds hoped that everyone in the world could bathe in God's grace. However, he did not want to deny the benefits of class. On the other hand, it was unfair to let a cardinal eat and dress like the most ordinary civilian. Farmer worked hard for a year, and at most, he could feed a few people. A cardinal, on the other hand, could cure hundreds or even thousands of people's illnesses in a year and could even save people's lives. It was obvious which was more important. It was the same no matter what job it was. This was extremely hypocritical. In fact, it was absolutely different. Of course, Nicholas's citizenship system was indeed a progressive system. At least, it was more progressive than the chaotic northeastern region. But they couldn't go on like this. The little Thunderbird needed to be taken care of, and they couldn't go back to isolated Cliff City for the time being. But they had to send someone back to inform them, lest the people who stayed there think that something had happened. Coincidentally, Just as Hanjin and the others were discussing who should go back first tomorrow, they suddenly heard the faint sound of a flute. Julia listened carefully for a moment, clenched her hands into fists, and covered her mouth. As her fingers moved rhythmically, the slightly muffled sound of the bagpipes rang out. Hanjin was stunned. "Who are they?" "It's an elf," Julia replied briefly, and began to play her bagpipes again. The other party had clearly heard Julia's response, and the sound of the flute became more urgent. Julia listened and played, and suddenly smiled. "They're here." "Who?" "Sunir." "Really?" Hanjin stood up in surprise and joy. "When have I ever joked with you?" Julia rolled her eyes at Hanjin. "Sunir? Who is she?" Jedi's asked. "Look at how happy he is." "You still can't guess?" Yelena said. "Oh." Jedi's pretended to be enlightened. There was a commotion in the forest, and Morrison's burly figure rushed out. He saw Hanjin, Yelena, and the others and shouted, "I've finally found you. I say, who did you fight with? There's a big hole over there. Was it a forbidden spell? Are you all okay?" Morrison's had too many questions, and no one knew where to start. Then Sunir and Sasu also came out. At the very back was the leader of the Dragon Singer mercenary group, Dwight Steele, with a dozen mercenaries. It seemed that Sunir and the others were afraid of danger, so they asked Dwight Steele to be their bodyguard. They were all familiar with each other, so there was no need for formalities. Jabron, Winston, and the others stood up and greeted them with smiles. Morrison's turned his eyes and saw the group of little thunderbirds. He shouted again, "Damn! What are you doing? Are you all here to raise chickens?" "Idiot! Are those even chickens? Go and take a look yourself," Leger sneered. "They're not?" Morrison's walked to the hole in a few steps, bent down, and grabbed a little thunderbird by its wing. He picked it up. "These are obviously little chicks. Where did you get so many eggs? Who hatched them? It's you, right?" "Leger." The little thunderbird struggled with all its might, raised its little beak, and fiercely pecked Morrison's finger. Back then, the little thunderbird had pecked through Saxon's combat boots. Although Morrison's skin was thick, it was no match for combat boots. He was immediately pecked until blood flowed out. "Wah, this little bastard." Morrison's university was furious. He threw the little thunderbird to the ground and raised his foot to step on it. Hanjin warned Morrison's with a nasal voice. "Morrison's, don't you dare." Yelena, who was chatting with Sunir, saw this scene and was so angry that her hair stood on end. Moxing froze there. He looked back at Hanjin and Yelena, whose eyebrows were furrowed. Finally, he withdrew his foot and gave a hollow laugh. Sunir took the opportunity to get rid of Julia and Yelena's entanglement and walked to Hanjin's side. She smiled sweetly at Hanjin, and the two quietly held hands. "Now you know how powerful they are?" Leger's face was full of ridicule. "These are thunderbirds. You're only powerful now." In a year, when the little thunderbirds grow up, you'll be struck by lightning. I'm afraid of them. Morrison showed a contemptuous smile and pointed at the little thunderbirds in the pit. But when he saw the little thunderbirds squeeze together and imagine what they would look like when they grew up, he couldn't help but feel numb. Moreover, thunderbirds were level 9 magical beasts. If he bragged too much, it would make people blush. Morrison's immediately pointed at the little thunderbird that was jumping on the ground with angry eyes. "You think I'm afraid of it." However, changing from them to it was already a compromise. Yelena ran over angrily and held the little thunderbird in her hand. It was strange that Hanjin could touch them, and so could Yelena, but others would be attacked when they approached. Everyone guessed that it was because Yelena practiced lightning magic. "So cute," Sunir exclaimed. Like Yelena and Julia, she also liked these little animals. When the thunderbirds grew up, it would be hard to say. "Yelena, let me see it." "No, these little guys are very fierce. They'll hurt you." Yelena shook her head. "It's okay." Hanjin smiled. Hearing Hanjin's words, Yelena handed the little thunderbird over. Sure enough, the little thunderbird was very well behaved. It looked around in Sunir's palm and walked a few steps carefully without any vigilance. So obedient. Sunir said with a smile. Oh, if only you'd come 10 days earlier. It would have been more interesting then. Yelena was a little worried. Now it's getting bigger, and its temper is getting worse. Hey, by the way, Raphael, didn't you say you wanted to raise a Thunderbird King? Do you think this little guy is okay? Any Thunderbird will do. Morrison's, you're in trouble. Leger gently bumped Morrison's arm. What? Morrison's didn't understand. Thunderbirds are very vengeful. The way you treated it just now? TSK, TSK, Leger said without thinking to scare Morrison's. Raphael wants to use magic to transform it into a Thunderbird King. Don't you know Raphael? I'm sure that this little Thunderbird will definitely become a 10th level Thunderbird King in the future. 10th level. Morrison's face was a little pale, and his mouth was mumbling something. Why are you here? Gibran changed the subject. It's like this. Sasu interrupted. Morrison's was not suitable to talk about things and often digressed or even talked nonsense. Sunir was sticking to Hanjin, so she was also not suitable. Lang Ning sent a letter. He first destroyed the Beatman's coalition, then set a trap and wiped out Woodrow's army. However, Woodrow escaped. After all, Woodrow is a 10th level archmage. If he doesn't dare to fight and wants to escape, Lang Ning can't do anything to him. Now Lang Ning is preparing to launch a counterattack. He wants to ask you. Sassus suddenly paused and glanced at Leger. Ask for your opinion. Let Lang Ning decide on the war, Han Jin said. Leger, what do you think? Sassu asked. If Raphael doesn't care, why should I care? Leger shrugged. But go back and tell him that he must win. Sassu sighed in relief. There's one more thing. In order to destroy the Beatman's coalition, he used a lot of magic crystals, and his reserves are running low. After the army enters the Biteman city, they have to use the advantage of the magic crystal cannons to destroy the city's defense. So, what? In order for him to fight well, Raphael already owes Isolated Cliff City so much money, and it's not enough for him. Yelena shouted. It's indeed not enough. Sassu smiled bitterly. Yelena, don't we have a lot of Thunderbird magic crystals? Give them all to them. They should be able to deal with it for a while. That's still not enough. Yelena was a little distressed. The 9th grade Thunder magic crystals were very helpful to her, but at this point, they couldn't keep those magic crystals. She still knew how to prioritize. They have more than 200 magic crystal cannons. It's too wasteful to use 9th grade Thunder magic crystals. If they were replaced with 6th grade or 7th grade Fire magic crystals, wouldn't take long. What if we add this? Is it enough? Han Jin smiled and opened his right hand. A giant magic crystal that was several times bigger than a wash basin appeared in front of everyone. The magic crystal was transparent like glass and emitted a moving luster under the sunlight. Everyone could feel an extremely clear and pure element fluctuation. Dragon crystal. Yelena was stunned. Not only her, but almost everyone present was stunned. Even Jed stood up and stared at the dragon crystal. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.